I woke up completely confused, staring at a European-style ceiling I didn't recognize. My head was spinning. Before I could even figure out where I was, a loud alarm rang out. Enemy attack. I tried to stand, but my body felt tiny and weak. When I looked down, I was shocked. I had the body of a small child, maybe 2 years old, sitting inside a glowing magic circle on a soft cushion. Magic circle? European-style buildings? And I understood that alarm perfectly without even thinking about it. Then it hit me. I died. My rocket experiment back home blew up and took me with it. And now, I had been reborn in another world. Outside the window, I heard a massive crash. I was scared, but I was too curious to stay still. I climbed up onto a chair, then onto a table, and looked outside. What I saw completely blew my mind. Giant white and blue mechs, 5 or 6 meters tall, were fighting a huge four-eyed black creature that looked like a wounded dinosaur. One mech swung a massive bloodied sword and cut it down. Mechs and magic. This world has everything. A young man stood among the mechs, angry and cursing at the dead beast. Somehow, I knew that was my father in this new life. Soon my mother rushed back upstairs and froze when she saw me awake and sitting on the table. She grabbed me tight and shouted out the window with pure joy that I was alive. I just smiled at her. Honestly, back in my old life, I had no one who would cry much over my death anyway. My parents had already divorced over money and cheating. I lived alone abroad, spending their money building crazy machines, modified excavators, homemade planes that almost killed me, a submarine I had to swim back from because it wouldn't float up, and finally, a rocket with a bomb attached. That one actually finished me. Not a bad life. But this new one? Looking around at this world of magic and giant mechs, I think I landed somewhere pretty good. My father came upstairs after the fight was over, and the dead beast had been dragged away. He asked if I felt okay. I nodded. Then we heard mechanical rumbling outside. My mother picked me up and carried me out into the snowy night. A whole line of mechs stood waiting, and the one leading them was even bigger than the ones from before, 7 or 8 meters tall. My father called out happily that I had recovered. A familiar voice came from inside the lead mech, full of surprise and joy. The front hatch opened, and an old man floated down surrounded by soft green magic light. That was my grandfather, Prince Sumanursa. He laughed and said he had just left the Pope with bad news about my condition, and now he came back to a miracle. So even the Pope had been involved in trying to save me. Clearly this was a very powerful family. My mother told me to call him Grandpa. I tried my best with my tiny mouth. It came out wrong and clumsy, but he didn't mind at all. He took me from my mother's arms, and that's when I saw it properly for the first time. The giant mech standing right behind him. I completely forgot about everything else. No man could resist something like that. I stared with my eyes wide open. My grandfather noticed and laughed, asking if I wanted my own mech someday. I nodded so hard my whole head moved. My full name in this life is Suman Leander. My father is Suman Polly. My mother's name is Ivy Cobb Elosa Miranda. Both my father and grandfather are powerful magic users, with grandfather reaching the Grand Mage level, strong enough to destroy an entire town with a single spell. But in this world, even the strongest warriors and mages prefer to pilot mechs, because mechs can be mass-produced. One talented pilot in a mech can beat a warrior or a mage who trained for years. It all started with the goblins. They were a weak race with little magic or fighting talent. So a goblin genius created a special power core that gathered magical energy and built a giant mechanical suit around it to make up for their physical weakness. They called it Dalata, meaning noble great weapon. With Dalata, the goblins became nearly unstoppable. Other races eventually captured some and figured out how the power core worked. Soon everyone was building their own versions. In human kingdoms, Dalata became known simply as knights, and the pilots who drove them were called mecha knights. There are 3 types. Military standard mechs, which any trained soldier can use, going up to 3 levels. Warrior mechs, only usable by those with fighting energy, going up to 9 levels. And magic mechs, only usable by mages, also going up to 9 levels. I had no interest in basic military mechs. I wanted the strongest kind, and with royal blood running through me, I already had the right to aim that high. 5 years passed quickly. I was now 7 years old. In my past life, I studied physics all the way to a doctorate, with a focus on mechanical engineering and automation. I also knew computer programming well. Now, with royal blood giving me a strong memory and natural magic talent, I threw everything into learning. Magic theory, alchemy, potions, mechanics, I studied all of it. Especially mechanics, since so much of it carried over from my old world knowledge. That morning, sitting inside my magic circle in the study, I felt a powerful surge from inside me. I had broken through to high mage level. I let out a slow breath and smiled to myself. Father and grandfather were both out, so I decided to save the news and surprise them at dinner. 7 years old and already a high mage. Not bad at all. But honestly, something else had been bothering me for a while. This world had mechs. Amazing, powerful, beautiful mechs that had existed for 300 years. And yet, people still traveled by horse carriage. Horse carriage. In a world with giant walking war machines. I understood that magic power cores were expensive and hard to mass produce. But not a single noble had thought to build something more practical for everyday travel. The technology tree in this world was completely crooked. Everything went into war and nothing into daily life. I decided it was time to do something about that. First things first, though. I told Uncle Lane to take me into the city on the mech, which never got old, and headed to the Mage Association to officially register my High Mage certification. I passed every test easily. I had already finished the written exam for the next level the year before. After that, I went straight to the Launting Trading Guild to find Uncle Emerson, a merchant who worked closely with my grandfather. I handed him a magic storage ring full of my saved allowance and told him what I needed. I wanted a railway built, iron tracks and wooden ties, connecting our family's mining area to our iron smelting factory. 3 months, I told him. Get it done. He looked at me like I was playing around. I was not playing around. The land belonged to my family. The steel and timber were birthday gifts I had already arranged. The money was mine. I had just gotten my High Mage certification that same day. There was no rule stopping me. Uncle Emerson just shook his head and warned me my grandfather might not be so happy when the paperwork landed on his desk tomorrow. I told him even if I got punished for it, the railway was getting built. He laughed and agreed to do it. I think he figured I was just a bored prince's grandson with too much allowance money. He had no idea what a railway would actually mean for trade and transportation in this world. If you want to get rich, build roads first. That truth was the same in any world, and it was the foundation of everything I was planning. Uncle Emerson stopped smiling the moment I unrolled my planning map. It showed the full route, shortest path through the mountain, carefully avoiding farmland, with notes on the rock conditions at each point. The original road between our mine and the iron factory was 37 kilometers. My railway route cut it down to 27. He couldn't figure out what kind of vehicle would even run on iron tracks, but the materials were ready, the mages were hired, and the money was there. He agreed to do it. That evening at dinner, I put on my best sulking face, poking at my food and pretending to be upset. Mother noticed first. Father guessed it was about etiquette lessons, which I hated. But then both father and grandfather used their magic sense to check my energy, and felt it immediately. High mage level. They both erupted with excitement. I kept up my little act, complaining that they hadn't even noticed on their own. Grandfather apologized, praised me, and asked what gift I wanted as compensation. I pulled out a stack of land requisition documents and slid them across the table. All I needed was his signature and seal. The money was already with Uncle Emerson. Grandfather looked confused. Why did I want to build a new road between the mine and the factory? I just smiled and said it was a secret. He checked with Uncle Lane, who confirmed I was serious. So grandfather signed everything right there at the dinner table. Then I asked a different question. I asked grandfather how large a private army he could raise in wartime as a prince with his own territory, and whether land he conquered would belong to him. The table went quiet. It was a strange thing for a 7-year-old to say so calmly. Grandfather answered, up to 50,000 in wartime, and yes, conquered land would be his. Though if the territory grew large enough, the army cap would rise too, as long as it stayed under 50% of the kingdom's total forces. I already knew the next part. Our kingdom sat tucked in the northwest corner of the continent, blocked by mountains to the southeast, with frozen wasteland to the northeast. Our only real opening was the western coastline, the sea. And with constant wars everywhere else on the continent, our isolated position was actually an advantage. We just needed to stay safe and stay out of it. I laid out a full continent map on the table. Grandfather and father stared at it. I was already thinking much bigger than a railway. If I could trigger a magical industrial revolution in this world, build factories, mass-produce magical weapons, create warships and air forces and heavy armor, then everything was possible. Piloting my own Dalita at the front while commanding fleets and armies from behind. It made my blood rush just thinking about it. But first things first. Resources, funding, infrastructure. I looked at grandfather and father and smiled. I told them that before they sent me to the Advanced Magic Academy next year, I wanted to go somewhere else first. The Royal Military Academy, Eins. Everyone at the table froze. Mother, father, grandfather, even Uncle Lane. A 7-year-old high mage, voluntarily asking to attend military school first. And after everything I had just said about territory, armies, and the continent map sitting in front of them, they were starting to realize this was not a child making plans. This was something else entirely. Out on the training ground, I cast my best fire magic. A spinning flame pillar that blew apart a 5-meter rock pile and left a half-meter crater in the ground. Full effort. Long chant. And it felt like launching one missile. Not enough. I wanted integrated warfare. Magic, machines, strategy, all working together. These people only knew brute force, raw magic, fighting energy, and shiny mechs. Coming from another world, I knew what real organized warfare looked like. And I planned to show them. But one step at a time. Today was about the railway. I called Uncle Lane and asked him to gather 5 Frost Blade mech pilots to come with us. We were going to move something. The squad leader looked confused when I said that. These were top-level military mechs, not delivery workers. I told them all to keep quiet about everything they saw today. 2 hours later, 5 mechs walked through the forest carrying a covered locomotive and 2 cargo cars, all hidden under black cloth. The iron wheels had been custom-made at a separate factory and assembled on the road by our own workers. No one outside had seen the full picture. Grandfather and father were already waiting at the railway site, with detection-blocking magic set up around the area. The mechs carefully set the cars down onto the iron tracks. Grandfather and father stared at it in silence, their expressions growing more serious by the second. Grandfather asked if anyone had seen the cars on the way over. I told him no, everything had been handled quietly. He nodded, satisfied. Father turned and gave the squad a firm order. Nothing they saw today was to leave this forest. Then grandfather asked me directly, did I understand what I had actually built? I smiled and told him, a transportation revolution. The mech pilots went completely still. I explained it simply. One train carries more cargo than an entire convoy, travels faster, needs far fewer workers, and runs on a fixed route with maximum efficiency. All it needed was one high-power magic energy core to run. The room, if a forest can be a room, held its breath. Grandfather exhaled slowly and told me he had been unsure about sending me to the military academy. Now he was certain. He said he would take me there himself. He understood. Transportation and logistics are the real foundation of any military force. And I had just proven, at 7 years old, that I was thinking about exactly that. Father asked what I wanted to call it. Iron Road, I said. Railway. And the vehicle, I thought for a moment, magic drive car. In my past world, the first trains ran on firepower. Here, everything ran on magic, so the name needed to change. Year 3245 of the Valar calendar. Kingdom of Elvisu. The first railway and the first magic train in this world quietly came into existence. Grandfather personally escorted me to the Royal Military Academy, Eins. I was 8 years old and entered through a recommendation letter, which the instructors clearly were not happy about. A small child walking in through the back door was not something they respected. That changed quickly. I kept up with every training session, woke up early, stayed up late, and scored in the top 5 on every written exam. The instructors started using me as their favorite weapon against the other students. Prince Ursa's grandson is 8 years old and scoring better than all of you. He's already a high mage and still studies magic theory. What's your excuse? I just kept my head down. Honestly, my high school schedule back in my old life was harder than this. In 2 years, I finished all the core courses the academy had to offer. The remaining lessons required real battlefield command experience, and at 10 years old, I couldn't hold actual military authority yet. That would come at 16 for most people, or 14 for me as a royal. though taking that path would mean leaving grandfather's territory permanently, since royal military rank and private territory command don't mix. I wasn't in a hurry for any of that. What mattered more was that during those 2 years, alongside the military training, I had quietly been developing my combat energy as well. I was now a mid-level warrior. Magic was still my stronger talent, but having both gave me something more important than power. It gave me backup. Match break. Magic runs dry. A warrior's fighting energy is always there. With the ambitions I was carrying, getting assassinated before I achieved anything would be a very stupid way to die. Graduation day arrived. The head instructor gave his speech. I stood in the front row, fighting the urge to fall asleep. When I went to handle my paperwork, the staff member told me I could make one request as a graduate. I asked them to erase my registered mage rank from the records. He looked at me strangely and warned me it would block my entry into the Advanced Magic Academy. I told him I wasn't in a rush. I was 10 years old. I had time. He processed it without arguing further. On the way back to collect my things, I ran into Walker Harimos, an earl's son and fellow graduate who was heading straight into the military. 18 years old, cheerful, and already excited about the graduation party. He told me the kitchen had prepared wild game and fruit, and of course, plenty of drinks. Then 3 carriages rolled into the courtyard flying flags I didn't recognize at first. They were from Yeminik, a small kingdom south of the mountains bordering our country. Walker said they were exchange students. Arriving early before winter made the mountain pass impossible to cross. I nodded. We both knew what that really meant. Things were getting dangerous over there, and someone wanted their children somewhere safe. Among the group, I noticed a girl about my age. Black straight hair, quiet expression, delicate features. Unusual coloring for this continent. Pure black hair was rare almost everywhere. Walker nudged me and teased that I should go ask for her name before leaving. I thought about it for a moment and said there was no need, because my army would conquer her country eventually anyway. Walker went completely still. I patted his arm. I was still too short to reach his shoulder, wished him a good party, and walked back to my room. After 3 days of travel, I finally crossed back into grandfather's territory. Along the road, I could already see workers laying iron tracks, with earth mages resting nearby. They moved with the ease of people who had been doing this for over a year. Grandfather was still hiring more. I asked Uncle Lane when grandfather planned to make it public or report to the king. He smiled and said there was no rush. Because none of the railway sections were connected yet, every line was deliberately left unfinished at both ends. To any outsider, it just looked like strange, disconnected roads going nowhere. Nobody could figure out what they were for. The family welcomed me home with a big dinner. Grandfather came out first, loudly wondering if I had grown any taller. Father shook his head behind him. Mother smiled quietly, though I noticed a shadow in her expression. She never wanted me involved in military matters. I changed the subject quickly and said I was starving. Then a baby's cry came from another room. Father told me grumpily that it was supposed to be an after-dinner surprise. I figured it out immediately. I had become a brother. Mother came back, carrying a tiny girl with big, curious eyes staring up at me. Her name was Suman Sevia. I reached out, and she immediately turned her full attention to me, studying me carefully. She was adorable. I told them they should have another one. Mother laughed. Father told me children weren't things you just picked up off the ground. Having a little sister at home to keep mother company was actually a relief, because I had no intention of staying home quietly for long. After dinner, grandfather sent the servants away. With only father, mother holding my sister, and Uncle Lane remaining, he laid out where everything stood. The main railway lines connecting the mines, industrial zones, and port were almost complete. 1 month to finish the final connections. The magic trains built secretly at various shipyards were stored and ready. Within 3 months, the first lines could begin operating, and the bulk orders of steel and low-grade magic power cores arranged through overseas contacts were ready to ship in by sea anytime. Father was more direct. Our territory's finances had gone into deficit. We were buying war materials, and that could not stay hidden forever. I asked if the suppliers could hold the goods a little longer. Grandfather said 1 to 2 years was possible since large deposits had already been paid, but sooner was safer. I told them not to worry. We were not planning a rebellion. We just intended to be the ones leading the way forward. Once railways spread across the entire kingdom, The ability to move supplies and troops would put us ahead of every other nation before they even understood what was happening. Father still looked uncertain. I reminded him that he and grandfather had already decided to bet on this the moment they saw what railways could do. Grandfather sighed and said I really did not seem like a 10-year-old. I told him, people who accomplish great things always show it early. Then I pulled out some exam papers I had brought back from the military academy. Papers I had done myself, then marked myself. Every single one was a perfect score. Grandfather stared at them. The truth was my actual scores in the academy were always held back on purpose. I never wanted to stand too far out. Coming in the top 5 each time, occasionally first, that was enough. The students there just wanted credentials. They were never going to keep up with someone who actually wanted to learn. Grandfather laughed and confiscated the papers, pointing out that smuggling military academy exam materials out was technically a serious crime. I shrugged and smiled like I had no idea what he was talking about. In the year that followed, grandfather sent me to one more school, the Knight Research Academy, where they designed and built the kingdom's mechs, including the frost blade units that guarded our estate. 1 year was not enough to master mech construction, but it was enough to learn the full production process, the key technologies, and the core design principles. Combined with my doctorate-level mechanical engineering knowledge from my past life, 1 year was plenty. By the time I was 11, I had reached High Warrior in combat energy, Grand Mage in magic, finished military academy theory, finished Knight research theory, and studied alchemy, forging, magic potions, magic circle theory, and magical transmission systems. My strongest subject by far was advanced mechanics. That was never going to be a weak point for someone with my background. Because of my military reserve status, the only information outsiders could find about me was this: grandson of Prince Ursa, weak magic talent, impressive warrior at 11 years old. Everything else was hidden. It had to be. I was the sole heir of a prince with growing ambitions and a monopoly on railway transportation forming quietly in the background. The moment the king realized what railways could do, our family would already be under scrutiny. If I also appeared talented in magic, mechanics, and military strategy all at once, that scrutiny would turn into something far more dangerous. Better to look ordinary. Grandfather had obtained royal approval to develop new transportation routes across the entire kingdom. He had done it without telling the king what he was actually building. The deal gave us permanent ownership of 80% of all revenue generated, with 20% going to the crown, plus the right to expand into any and used land. He had also quietly partnered with other major nobles who held large territories, locking up railway rights across nearly the entire country. By the time anyone understood what iron rails and magic trains could actually do, it would be too late to compete. I went to grandfather's study and laid 2 drawings on his desk. Anyone from my old world would have recognized them immediately: a tank and a propeller aircraft. The cost of a single mech in this world was enough to build 10 tanks or 5 aircraft. Tanks and planes could be mass-produced with steel and basic magic power cores. The cost efficiency compared to mechs was not even close. Every nation on this continent had been so dazzled by the beauty of giant mechs that nobody had thought to ask whether they were actually the best way to fight a war. I told grandfather the tank design was solid. The aircraft was less certain. Aerodynamics was difficult to calculate perfectly without testing, which is why I called them first-generation designs. Grandfather said the designs were more than enough. His engineers could refine them further. And if the aircraft needed a little wind magic assistance to fly properly, that was a simple fix. Father appeared in the doorway and asked if it was time to collect our overseas orders. I told him yes. The steel and magic cores we had been stockpiling were not for trains. They were for tanks and planes. The trains had just been the cover story to explain the purchases. As for hiding the factory that would eventually mass-produce weapons, grandfather smiled and said our territory only had a magic train manufacturing facility, a very large one. The 3 of us looked at each other and laughed. In the year 3250, all railway lines across grandfather's territory were connected simultaneously. Construction began across 10 regions of the kingdom at the same time. Earth mages cleared the ground, experienced workers laid the tracks, and in 2 months 1,000 kilometers of railway were complete. Then grandfather had the first magic train, 5 carriages, engines on both ends, transported to the capital and placed on the line between the royal mines and iron factory. Every critic went silent. The mockery stopped. The shock began. And the other princes and dukes felt something they would carry for a long time afterward. They had missed it completely. And now it was too late. Grandfather had the monopoly. Winter had barely ended when I arrived at Polaris Academy, the largest all-purpose school in the kingdom. Unlike the specialized magic or warrior academies, this one trained students in everything, including mech piloting. I was 12 years old, the normal entry age, and enrolled wearing light armor with a standard sword on my back. My actual magic level by this point was Archmage, 5th stage, stronger than some of the teachers here. Nobody knew that. The magic suppression hairband I wore, styled with a deep blue ribbon tied at the back of my head, hid all of it. Outsiders would see the hairband as a mental magic defense tool, reasonable for a warrior type. That was the point. I came under a false identity arranged through the military reserve office. Just a student named Su Lian. No family name that connected back to the prince. After changing out of my armor into school uniform, I found a seat in the semicircular classroom. A girl with golden hair in the same uniform came over and asked if she could sit beside me. I said yes. Then I told her I was male, which surprised her more than it should have. Silver hair is rare in this kingdom and usually seen on women. Combined with my fairly soft features and voice, being mistaken for a girl had happened before. It would probably happen again. Her name was Drasandi Anamisai, not a noble family name I recognized, and she seemed to be from outside the kingdom. She found my name equally odd, just 2 short syllables, no elaborate title attached. I explained simply that was my name and left it at that. The teacher ran through roll call. I quietly identified which students were noble-born and made mental notes. After the opening ceremony and textbook distribution, we had free time. I went to a corner of the school stadium, activated a small magic communication device hidden in my collar, and put on what looked like earphones. Uncle Lane's voice came through clearly from just outside the school grounds in a small wooded area nearby. We confirmed the communication setup worked. I asked him whether he had obtained the student and staff roster. He said the basics were ready and the detailed profiles would take a few more days. I told him to leave them at our agreed drop point in 3 days. The reason was simple. I needed to identify talent early. People worth getting to know, possibly building real friendships with over time. People who might matter later. We ended the call, and I headed back to my room. What I did not know was that the academy principal, an old man named Brown Nehemiah, was already watching. Grandfather had sent word ahead asking him to look after me. The principal had noticed something unusual about my hairband, even from hundreds of meters away. And a red-haired female teacher beside him reminded him that princes from a magic family tend to produce magic children. The principal just smiled and said he already knew. Life at Polaris Academy was relaxed compared to everything I had done before. Classes ran from 9:30 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, with a long lunch break and nap time in between. After the military academy's brutal schedule, this felt like a holiday. I made it even more relaxed on the first day of magic theory class. When the teacher, J. Christie, introduced the subject, half the warrior students immediately complained about having to study magic. He shut them down quickly. If you fight mages without understanding magic, you are just hoping they will hit you with their staff instead of a spell. I raised my hand and showed him my old written exam records from years ago. I asked if I could use the class period for independent study instead. He looked at the papers, paused slightly when he noticed the date. I had taken those exams at age 5 and approved it without asking too many questions. He even offered the same deal to any other student with a qualifying score. I bowed politely and walked out while the rest of the class watched with envy. Someone muttered that next semester the theory would cover intermediate and advanced magic, and then I would have nowhere to run. I almost laughed. I was already an archmage. Those exams were not going to be a problem. Back in my room, I pulled out the mech modification textbook I had brought from the Knight Research Academy. Tanks and planes made more practical sense for large-scale war, but mech still called to me in a way nothing else did. The sheer scale of them, the raw presence. No cost analysis was going to change that feeling. A man who stops to watch an excavator work for half an hour has no defense against a 6-meter mech. I certainly did not. I converted every magic-related class I could into self-study time. It drew a little attention at first, but a student who skips class and never talks to anyone eventually just fades into the background. Within 2 months, I had become invisible in the classroom, which was exactly what I wanted. Then the announcement came. First combat field exercise. 5 days in Sagi Forest to the east of the academy. Teachers and mechs would accompany us, along with senior students on escort duty. The forest had monsters ranging from beginner to advanced level, challenging enough for new students, but manageable for anyone who met the enrollment requirement of mid-level warrior or above. The death risk was real enough that the academy took precautions seriously. I barely heard any of that. Because standing outside were 5 mechs, 6 meters tall, retired military frostblade units, upgraded and modified for academy use. Bigger than the standard version, heavier swords, stronger armor, and magic attack power. Retired only because the speed was slightly lacking and the cost was high. But that size, that presence, absolutely magnificent. The teacher told us to form our own groups, 3 to 7 people, no assignments, just like real life. Most students had already arranged their groups privately beforehand. Within 30 seconds the room had sorted itself out, leaving a handful of quieter students standing alone. Drasandi came over nervously and asked if I wanted to team up. I said yes. Then another quiet student approached and asked the same. I nodded again. His name was Rex Blur, a merchant's son and high mage who specialized in fire magic with some earth and wind on the side. I had already read his profile before school started. With me on the front line, Rex handling magic damage, and Drasandi using wind support and water healing. The 3 of us fit together well enough. Drasandi noticed I was carrying 2 extra swords on my back in addition to the one at my hip, and asked why I was not just storing them in my magic ring. I told her swords on the back were useful for blocking surprise attacks from behind. That was true. What I did not mention was that I actually fought with 2 blades, and one of them was a specially made magic sword. When it came time to pick a team leader, I immediately pushed it to Rex. A mage standing at the back was calmer under pressure than a warrior going in at the front, I said. Rex agreed reluctantly. Drasandi looked slightly puzzled. I seemed like the natural leader to her. But drawing attention to myself was the last thing I wanted at this school. Rex went to register our group and collect the equipment, a magic communication device, a trophy verification tool, and an emergency scroll as backup if the device failed. Then I spotted someone interesting nearby, a senior student wearing glasses and carrying an oversized backpack despite having a storage ring, clearly not the physical fighting type. He was here to complete his escort duty credits. That kind of student collects academic points through research, not combat, so field escort work with younger students made sense. This was Casper Josh, a senior in the Magic Alchemy program. Exactly the kind of technical talent I had been looking for since the first day of school. I walked over and greeted him like an old friend, mentioning we had met briefly at the library before. He remembered, a little uncertain at first. Rex immediately perked up when he heard me introduce Casper as someone skilled in alchemy who could craft all kinds of magic tools. With only 3 people in our group, finding a capable senior escort had been a real concern. Rex asked Casper directly if he would join us. Casper laughed a little shyly and said he had just barely broken through to Grand Mage level. Nothing impressive. Rex looked enormously relieved. A Grand Mage in a forest full of beginner to advanced monsters was more than enough protection. Everyone introduced themselves. Drasandi, Rex, Casper. All 3 were clearly on the quieter, more introverted side. That suited me perfectly. A calm group with no internal drama. Just getting through the exercise without standing out. And I was right where I wanted to be, standing next to someone I had planned to meet for a long time. Before we entered the forest, I thought more about why I wanted Casper close. His research specialty was magic element conversion, considered a fairly useless field by most people in this world. Mages could already use multiple elements without much restriction, so converting one element to another seemed pointless for combat. But I saw it differently. In this world, elements are the foundation of everything. The same way atoms build matter in my old world, elements here build and power everything. If Casper could achieve even basic civilian-level element conversion, turning stored elements into fire energy, then we could replace expensive magic power cores with something far cheaper. War machine production costs would drop dramatically. Civilian alchemy research? To me, that was military research with a different label. He was exactly the kind of person I needed on my side. The Sagi forest was enormous, up to 500 kilometers across at its widest point, with small mountain ranges running through it. Somewhere deep inside supposedly lived an 8th rank monster, possibly a dragon type. Our group was restricted to the outer zones, which held mostly beginner to advanced rank monsters. Near the front of the march, a boy named Connie Alfred was already loudly announcing to everyone that his group would finish first. He was the grandson of one of the kingdom's 3 great dukes, currently a grand mage, the strongest student in our class on paper. He had a group of followers around him agreeing with everything he said, and 2 girls calling him impressive. I listened quietly and felt nothing but mild contempt. Grandfather was right about the nobles in this kingdom being mostly useless. The monsters Connie was bragging about killing in his family trials were practically tame. One was a rideable earth dragon often used as a mount, likely a reject from the Duke's own cavalry. The other was a black bear favored by nobles as a food source. Impressive to his audience, meaningless to me. When the teacher announced we were entering the forest, Connie immediately declared that first place belonged to his group and dared anyone to object. Drasandi puffed up her cheeks in annoyance. Rex shrugged and said we had no chance of competing anyway. I asked Casper quietly if he had any suggestions for which area to head toward. He glanced at Connie's group at the front and said it might be wise to wait until they moved, then go the opposite direction. Drasandi immediately agreed. Rex nodded with visible relief. That was exactly what I had been hoping Casper would say. Connie's 7-person group charged into the forest first, naturally. We went in last, looping around the edge before entering to make sure we ended up nowhere near them. I tied off my horse at a tree and looked back once before we stepped into the trees. This far out, even the 7th-rank Grand Mage teacher accompanying us would have trouble maintaining full mental detection coverage over the entire area. Which meant if something happened that required me to actually show what I could do, there would be no one watching closely enough to notice. The first 3 days in Sagi Forest went smoothly. The outer zone had plenty of weak monsters, nothing Rex and I could not handle easily. I fought at the front, Rex handled the magic attacks, Drasandi supported and healed, and Casper watched from the back. By day 3 we had already hit the minimum hunting quota needed to pass. I spent most of my free time talking with Casper, showing just enough alchemy knowledge to seem like a warrior with an unusual hobby. It worked. We found common ground easily. That evening we sat around a campfire. Drasandi counted our monster crystals happily and said we had already passed. Casper explained that the Academy deliberately kept the outer zone well-stocked with manageable monsters for first-year students. Passing was the expected result, not a special achievement. I said passing was enough for me. Drasandi looked at me with mild frustration, clearly wanting to aim higher. Rex agreed with me, and she gave up on us both. As the others relaxed, I caught something with my arch-mage-level spirit sense, a powerful magical presence somewhere in the forest. Strong. Interesting. Not something the others had noticed. I yawned loudly and said I was going to sleep early, then lay down under a nearby tree. About half an hour later, once I was sure everyone had drifted off, I quietly cast a low-level sleep wind spell to keep them under, then slipped away into the darkness. I activated dark vision magic and moved through the forest until I found a rocky hill where a group of rough-looking adults were sitting around a fire playing cards. They had already noticed me coming, but paid me no attention. I tossed a small bag of 10 gold coins onto their card table and asked if they could keep an eye on my teammates while I handled something nearby. I let them assume I had found a target using a special magic tool, which they seemed to accept. One of the men studied me for a moment, clearly trying to figure out if I was a noble kid or a merchant's son. I did not fit either picture. He shrugged, split the coins, and said the job was accepted. These were private bodyguards, brought along secretly by noble families to shadow their children during the exercise. With the teachers and senior escorts already present, they had nothing to do, so they were playing cards out of boredom. I drew my long sword from my left hip and pulled the shorter blade from my back with my left hand. Then I sprinted into the trees. One of the men watched me go and said I did not move like a spoiled noble at all. The others had already gone back to their cards. My spirit sense had been right. Deep in the forest, moving between the trees, I caught sight of it, a 5-meter-long black storm magic tiger. 5th rank. This was exactly the kind of monster summoner mages fought over. Its magic core was one of the best materials for dark summoning and puppet magic. Grandfather had once taken me to a monster market where I found a weak 3rd-rank version, and I had already used that core to confirm my theory about something important. But 5th-rank cores were almost impossible to buy. Even grandfather had failed to get one in time. I was not letting this one get away. I burst through the trees like a silver flash and hit the tiger across its midsection with both blades before it even registered I was there. It roared in pain and fury. It sensed my combat energy level, high warrior, 3rd stage, and was furious that something so far below its rank had dared to ambush it. It lunged at me immediately. I dodged and used the moment to silently cast 5 mid-level body enhancement spells on myself in rapid succession: speed, iron skin, strength, stamina, and perception. No chanting needed at my magic level. My body sharpened instantly. When the tiger lunged again, I dropped low, slid to its side, and drove both blades in a crossing spiral into its right front paw. I cut down to the bone. It was not enough to sever the limb, but that was fine. Cripple one leg on a 4-legged beast, and its movement drops sharply within seconds. That was the plan, and it worked. Then came the magic. A 5th-rank monster with dark and wind affinity was always going to retaliate with its innate spells once its body was limited. It did exactly that, unleashing several powerful attacks in a row. I kept moving, kept the pressure on its injured side, and whittled it down steadily. 3 minutes later, the Black Storm Tiger was on the ground, all 4 limbs damaged, magic power depleted from repeated attacks, bleeding out in a ruined clearing. Every tree and rock within 100 meters had been shattered, mostly from its own thrashing body. Fortunately, all its innate magic was single target, so the destruction stayed contained. I stepped onto the still twitching body and drove a sword through its heart. The magic core floated up under my control, egg-sized, irregular diamond shape, faintly glowing. A complete 5th-rank Black Storm Tiger core. I stood there feeling genuinely satisfied. Before enrolling at the academy, I had spent time hunting with Uncle Lane as registered adventurers, and I had also challenged 6th-rank monsters at the arena in grandfather's territory multiple times. This was not the first 5th-rank monster I had killed, but it was the first one I had taken down completely alone, without Uncle Lane nearby as backup. And I had done it without using anything higher than warrior-level techniques, not a single 3rd-tier magic spell. I checked around. No other powerful monsters had wandered over. The Grand Mage Teacher's presence was still steady and distant, unmoved. Good. This area was already beyond the outer zone, and a night fight between monsters out here would not draw his attention. Now I just had the body to deal with. 5 meters long, no space in my storage ring for something this large. I cast wind magic to seal away the blood scent, ice magic to prevent decay, then split the earth and buried the whole thing 5 meters underground. I marked the location mentally. Uncle Lane could come dig it up later. I cleaned the blood off myself with water magic and walked back to camp. Something had changed in the forest, and I was not sure what it was yet. While Drasandi and Rex rested and recovered their magic after a hard fight against 12 monsters, 2 of them 3rd rank, I climbed a tree to scout. The number of monsters in our area had been unusually high, and even the territorial breed-type monsters were appearing more than they should. I stared toward the deep forest and felt an uneasy trembling in the magical elements around me. Faint but wrong. If the Grand Mage Teacher had already detected real danger, he would issue an emergency order. Until then I waited. Down below, Casper was watching me with a different kind of attention than before. After today's fight, he had clearly noticed that I moved nothing like a first-year student. My positioning, my stamina management, the way I held the line while Rex attacked, none of that came from a beginner. He was trying to figure out who I actually was. Good. That was exactly the impression I needed him to have. Once the holidays came, I planned to invite him to grandfather's estate and have grandfather offer him a place in our research division. A combination of genuine friendship and a prince's backing was usually enough to bring in the people I wanted. Then the emergency signal came through. A 5th-rank wind spell carrying the voice of Professor Bunyan Johnstone, Grand Mage of the Alchemy Department, transmitted directly to every student's magic communication device. All groups were to reach the designated gathering point before sunset. Avoid fighting where possible. Move fast. The first 5 groups to arrive would receive bonus credits. The cheerful credit offer was meant to keep students calm. It did not fool me. Drasandi thought maybe a powerful monster had been spotted. Rex nodded. Merchant's son, quick thinker, probably right on the surface. Casper pulled out his magic compass immediately. I drew my sword and pointed in a direction that was not straight to the camp. Casper told me that was not the direct route. I explained that given where we were in the forest, the camp was actually farther away than the forest edge, and if the situation turned dangerous, breaking out of the trees might be safer than pushing toward the gathering point. Then Casper said something important. If the threat was not a powerful monster, it would not be moving toward a location with a grand mage's magical presence. It would spread without direction. Rex went pale. He had already understood. I said it plainly. Magic disaster. Drasandi and Rex both froze with genuine fear in their eyes. A magic disaster meant uncontrolled elemental energy surging outward with no target and no pattern. Unlike a monster that could be avoided or redirected, a magic disaster hit everything in range. In that case, staying close to the Grand Mage was far safer than running blindly out of the forest. My route accounted for both possibilities. Angled toward the forest edge, but not so far that we could not redirect toward the gathering point if needed. Casper chanted a high-level group speed enhancement spell. All four of us felt our legs lighten immediately. He also quietly collected all the monster crystals from our recent kills and stored them safely while we moved. I kept my spirit sense focused deep into the forest as we ran, trying to determine which it was. If it was just a monster, we would be fine. If it was a magic disaster, we were already in real danger. At the gathering point, Professor Bunyan Johnstone was already hovering above the treetops. He had sent emergency requests to both the Academy and the nearby Royal Military. Jay, my magic theory teacher and a 5th rank archmage himself, flew up beside him. They had confirmed it. A rank 8 magic disaster, erupting from deep within Sigi Forest. Rank 8 meant this was nothing like a normal storm or wildfire. Anything below rank 7 was dangerous for ordinary people, but manageable for trained mages and warriors. Above 6, the rules changed completely. To survive near the core of a rank 8 disaster without protection, you needed to be at least a 5th rank archmage or equivalent warrior level. These were first-year students. Casper received the emergency communication from the supervising teacher through his escort device. His face stayed controlled, but I could see the fear underneath. He called my name quietly, and I understood immediately. Direction confirmed. Straight to the gathering point and Professor Bunyan's protection. I adjusted course without breaking stride. Then a burst of unstable magical energy shot out of nowhere and flew directly at Drasandi. She saw it coming but had no time to react. I turned back and cut straight through it with a combat energy charge strike, dispersing it before it hit her. Drasandi stared at me. I told her what was coming next. Once the magical elements started going unstable, wild natural monsters would begin appearing in swarms. We needed to reach the others immediately. I grabbed her wrist and ran. When she found her footing, I let go and moved back to the front. Casper was staring at my back. He had noticed something. The way I had cut that energy burst. I had aimed precisely at its condensation point, dispersing it with minimal force. That was not a beginner's instinct. Then he felt something ahead with his spirit sense. 2 rank 3 magic wolves, just formed from the unstable elements, charging straight at me. Before Casper could finish a shortened chant, and before Drasandi could react, I reached back with my left hand, gripped the short blade at my back, and used Silver Moon Slash. 2 strikes. 2 wolves. Both dead before they hit the ground. The silence from the others lasted about 2 seconds. Then Rex started running again, without saying anything. Casper blinked slowly. Drasandi looked like she was reassessing everything she thought she knew about me. The short sword on my back was never a spare. I always fought with 2 blades. I told everyone to keep a spell ready while moving, told Drasandi to hold a basic water barrier if she could manage it, and called out that a teacher was coming to meet us. We kept running. Behind me, Casper went quiet for a moment and then thought something he did not say out loud. How did I know a teacher was coming to intercept us? Honestly, I was not very worried about myself. My spirit sense had already mapped out our position. We were on the western edge of the disaster zone, and my own strength was more than enough to keep me alive. What I was worried about was the others, especially Casper. My spirit sense picked up a 6th rank combat energy signature moving fast in our direction. That was Teacher Kino coming to intercept us. 3 minutes away at current speed. But I could also feel the monster swarm already forming in the unstable magical surge from deep in the forest. At this pace, we would collide with it in 2 minutes. I looked back at Drasandi, 12 years old, already gasping, legs barely holding. She was not going to last another 3 minutes of running. Not a chance. I stopped. She ran straight into my back, and before she could react, I picked her up and put her on mine. Then I turned and shouted at the other two to run like their lives depended on it. Because they did. Rex gritted his teeth and pushed harder. Casper immediately called out that we needed to angle away from the direct path. Running straight toward the gathering point would put us right in front of the swarm. Moving diagonally toward the forest edge while drifting toward Kino's position was the better route. It would add distance, but reduce how fast the monsters would catch us. The problem was Rex. A longer run might break him. Casper solved it without being asked. He pulled 2 bottles of green alchemical potion from his ring and handed one to Rex. Speed enhancement, weight reduction, high side effects, 1 day in bed afterward. Rex drank it without hesitating. Casper drank the other. Then both of them noticed I had picked up my pace while carrying Drasandi on my back. I had been holding back the whole time. On my back, Drasandi was having a completely different experience from everyone else. She had gone red in the face and was clearly not thinking entirely about the disaster. I told her to keep her water barrier ready and throw it at anything that came at us. She answered in a very small voice. I did not think about it. In my mind, she was a 12-year-old child. I just needed her magic functional and her body out of the way. Casper called out that Kino was close, half a minute away. I knew it was closer to a full minute, but I was not going to argue with something that kept everyone moving. The swarm sounds were already audible. Something lunged at us from the side. Drasandi was ready. She released her water bubble directly at it. No damage, but enough to knock it sideways and buy us a second. I told her to keep going. Rex was chanting an attack spell. Casper was layering a 4th-rank defensive shield over all of us. Through the trees ahead, I could already see Kino coming at full sprint. Big, rough-looking, not the type who worried about appearances. Relief was half a second away. Then I felt the threat. Drasandi screamed. I threw her forward toward Kino with everything I had and drew my sword in the same motion. A massive clawed impact crashed against my blade. The force of it blew Rex and Casper sideways off their feet. The magical energy from the collision rang through the trees. A mutant 5th-rank black storm tiger. Right in front of me. I shouted at the others to go. Rex scrambled up and ran toward Kino. Casper looked at me for exactly 1 second, then ran. They both knew the truth. 2 mages with no combat strength staying here would only make things harder. Kino was the only one who could help, and he was still 10 seconds away. I threw the tiger off me with a sharp twist, rolled to the side, and jumped up into a tree. Below, the mutant black storm tigers circled slowly. Watching for the moment, I tried to jump to another branch. It knew that in the air I would have nowhere to go. The moment I left the tree, it would launch itself and hit me before I could land. Teacher Kino had reached the others. He was strong enough to handle the surrounding low-rank monsters easily, and he had clearly understood from the way I threw Drasandi and blocked the tiger's attack that I was not the one who needed rescuing. But he still told me not to be greedy. In his eyes, I was a student, and high warrior rank was not enough to fight a 5th-rank mutant tiger alone during a rank 8 magic disaster. I talked him out of staying. I told him plainly. He could protect himself, but protecting 3 exhausted mages with depleted magic and one of them on borrowed time from alchemical side effects was a different problem. If he stayed for me, all 3 of them were at greater risk. The math was simple. Leave me. Take them. I could get out myself. Kino waited for a moment, then made his call. Casper said he trusted my judgment and followed without much hesitation. Rex hesitated slightly, but went. Drasandi was the last to move. She wanted to argue, but the swarm was already pouring through the trees toward them, and she was 12 years old with no combat training and nearly no magic left. She went. She looked back once. I did not watch long enough to catch the expression. I jumped to a different tree and moved in the opposite direction, drawing the tiger further from the group. Then I looked down at the tiger and said out loud that it must have followed the blood smell I had not fully cleaned last night. My water-cleansing spell had been good enough to fool humans, but not a black storm tiger with its hunting instincts. It had smelled its dead companion on me. A bolt of black lightning came from its mouth. I dodged. Mutant form. It had absorbed lightning from the chaotic elements during the disaster. That made it slightly more unpredictable. But the disaster also solved my biggest problem. With magical elements in full chaos across the whole forest, the Grand Mage Teacher's ability to detect specific magic signatures in this area was essentially useless. The noise was too great, which meant I could finally stop pretending. I sheathed both swords. The tiger felt something shift and went still. The threat coming off me had just increased sharply despite the fact that I had put my weapons away. I pulled out the third blade from my back, the one I had never used in front of anyone. Different from the other two. A groove ran down the center of the blade, not for drawing blood, but for channeling magic power smoothly. This was a magic sword, built specifically for someone who trained in both combat energy and magic simultaneously. Then I reached up and untied the deep blue ribbon from my hair. The suppression seal released. 5th rank archmage level magical energy poured out of me freely for the first time. The tiger took a step back. I smiled at it and said we could have some real fun now. I leapt from the branch. The magic sword blazed with deep red energy. Combined magic and warrior technique. Flame of resentment. I moved through the chaos of the forest with the tiger right behind me, its massive body crashing through trees and sending lower-rank monsters scattering. Even wild monsters were getting destroyed by its frenzied attacks. But it could not catch me with wind magic boosting my speed. I kept backing up, chanting the high-rank fire spiral spell with my left hand while the magic ring amplified the release. The moment the spell launched, I shifted immediately, gripped the magic sword, and activated Flame Arm, pumping every bit of strength my left arm could handle into a single upward diagonal cut aimed at the tiger's neck while it was charging through the fire toward me. It expected an opening after the spell. It got a blade at 45 degrees from below, cutting deep enough to scrape bone. The tiger tumbled through 2 trees before stopping. I closed the distance and drove a sword into its heart. Magic core out. Seal the scent, freeze the body, bury it underground. Done. I climbed to the highest nearby tree and cast a 5th rank wind concealment spell, the kind that blended my presence, my scent, and my appearance into the surrounding trees. Every monster below me immediately lost track of their target. They looked around confused for a moment, then rejoined the swarm, pushing toward the forest edge. I sat in the branches and let out a slow breath. That had been tighter than I wanted to admit. The key moment, releasing a high-rank magic spell and switching immediately to a physical weapon strike, had only worked because I had practiced that exact transition many times. If the timing had been off by a second, the tiger would have hit me while I was still chanting. I needed to get to the point where I could release that spell with no chant at all without losing power. Still work to do. I looked at the 2 5th rank Black Storm Tiger cores in my hand. One normal, one mutant from the disaster's energy. I smiled anyway. 2 cores was enough to begin building what I had been planning since I first understood this world's mech technology. A 5th rank warrior type mech, what the kingdom called a Biachi Knight. The same class as the one grandfather used to ride casually when I was 2 years old. That was my first target. The Black Storm Tiger core was one of the best possible materials for the magical core system of that mech design. The 3rd rank core from the monster market had already confirmed the theory worked. Now I had what I actually needed. I looked toward the gathering point and felt a massive 7th rank magic formation activate. Someone had come prepared. With a 7th rank barrier up, everyone inside was safe as long as they were not at the center of the disaster itself. My concern shifted to the surrounding area. This disaster had started inside the forest, which meant it was detected late. The nearby villages might not have had enough warning. The permanent military station near Sigi Forest was around 2,000 troops with only 30 to 50 mechs of mixed ranks. For an 8th rank disaster driving a full monster swarm, that was not going to be comfortable. I made a mental note. Future military reforms needed to prioritize dangerous zones with proper garrison strength. Then I looked in another direction entirely and said quietly to myself that the things I had been preparing might actually get used sooner than expected. Back at grandfather's estate, an emergency communication came through on the special long-range magic device. General Monslow was on the line, one of the kingdom's senior military commanders. He had received word from Professor Bunyan about the rank 8 magic disaster in Sigi Forest and had already ordered the 17th Army Corps to move. Then he remembered something. Did our railway line pass near Onlai town, close to the forest? Grandfather pulled up the construction map immediately. There it was, the Ksefno to Legkolfov intercity line, barely connected for 2 weeks, still in trial operation with only empty test runs completed. Not yet officially approved. Monslow did not hesitate. No time for that. He needed the 17th Corps at the forest as fast as possible. The permanent garrison there would not hold. He told grandfather to get the train crews ready and have the trains meet the army at Shalikoff town, the nearest station. Grandfather gave the order to the Ksefno station immediately. 3 train sets, maximum length, cargo cars stripped down to just the flat platforms. 5 minutes to prepare, then depart. The station crew froze for a moment. They were still in trial operation. This had jumped straight to military emergency use without any warning. But orders were orders. The station manager pushed everyone hard, and they got it done. Monslow issued his own orders to the 17th Corps. 300 of their best mechs and 9,000 soldiers, moving immediately to Shalikoff town to board the trains. No training, no experience with railway loading, no preparation. He told them to grab onto whatever they could. Soldiers hold on to mechs, mechs grip the flatbeds, and be at Onlai within 1 hour. The Army Corps was confused. The routes had just been changed. Nobody had ever loaded a 15-ton 5-meter mech onto a flatbed train before. 300 of them plus 9,000 men felt impossible. But orders were orders. The first emergency military deployment by magic train in the history of Elvisu Kingdom began in the middle of a Rank 8 disaster, completely unplanned, with no rehearsal, driven entirely by necessity. I was still moving through the treetops near the forest edge, quietly calculating in my head. The Academy mages would prioritize setting up protective barriers around the nearby villages. Eliminating the monster swarm was a job for the military. Based on jurisdiction and proximity, Monslow would be commanding, and the 17th Corps out of Ksefno was the closest major force. 12,000 troops, around 800 mechs of various ranks. Though I had to smile a little when I thought about the first-rank mechs. The Elvisu Kingdom called them Agent class. Under 3 meters tall. Basically a full-body metal suit. Calling them mechs felt generous. I reached the last tree at the forest edge and looked out at a distant village that had activated its emergency barrier formation. Without help arriving in the next few minutes, it would not last much longer. I sat on the branch and stayed put. Charging through a monster swarm to reach the village would just turn me into an injured burden. There was nothing useful I could do from here. So I leaned back against the trunk and waited. The magic trains were moving. The army was loading. The teachers from the academy were on their way. I smiled to myself. They were all about to see exactly what a railway could do. At the train station in Ksefno, General Monslow's orders hit the 17th Corps like a thunderbolt. Army Commander Tuttle Tommy watched with his jaw hanging open as the first magic train pulled away from the platform loaded with 100 mechs and 3,000 soldiers. The loading had actually gone smoothly. Mechs could walk onto the flatbed cars themselves and grip the platform with their hands. Soldiers grabbed onto the mechs or crouched low and held whatever they could find. 30 flatbed sections per train, 3 third-rank mechs or 4 second-rank mechs per section, with soldiers packed between them. 4 high-power magic cores driving the whole thing forward. And it moved. Steadily, picking up speed, carrying all of that weight without the tracks bending or breaking. The soldiers on the ground watching the second train load stared in silence. Most of them had heard about magic trains, but never seen one. Their understanding of transport had always been horse-drawn carts and mechs walking on their own legs. What they were looking at now broke every assumption they had. Tuttle yelled at them to stop staring and get on board. They muttered that he had been just as shocked 2 minutes ago. He yelled louder. Once the trains were moving and the initial shock faded, the mood shifted. The rhythmic sound of wheels on iron tracks filled the silence. Every click of the rails brought them closer to a Rank 8 disaster zone. Most of these soldiers were ordinary warriors. Some were high warriors at best. A monster swarm from a Rank 8 disaster was not something anyone walked away from casually. There was no turning back. The train would not stop before the destination. At the gathering point under Professor Bunyan's protective barrier, the group count came in 2 short. 1 confirmed dead, Abel Marcus, a high warrior from Connie Alfred's group. Bunyan questioned Connie directly. The noble boy's eyes shifted and his answer came too quickly. The story was that Abel had simply run too slowly. Bunyan said nothing more, but his silence said everything. A high warrior ran faster than a mage who only knew lightning and fire attacks. The math did not add up. The second missing student was from Rex's group, a high warrior named Su Lian. The supervising teacher explained what had happened, how I had carried Drasandi on my back while running, how I had thrown her to safety the moment the mutant tiger appeared, how I had told Teacher Kino to take the 3 mages and leave while I stayed behind to fight. Teacher Kino had gone back to look for me. Status unknown. Bunyan looked at Drasandi, still crying, with Rex and Casper sitting beside her. He thought quietly that whoever this Su Lien was, no noble family name, probably the child of a skilled adventurer, someone who could sense a 5th rank attack in time, throw a person off their back mid-stride, and make that kind of decision in that moment was not ordinary. There was a chance. Then Connie opened his mouth and said a high warrior against a 5th rank mutant tiger in the middle of a monster swarm had no chance at all. He even described what the body would look like, laughing while Drasandi sobbed harder. Bunyan's grand mage-level spirit pressure slammed down on Connie like a physical weight. The boy froze completely. Bunyan told him to sit down and shut his mouth. If he said one more word, noble family or not, he was going outside the barrier to join the monsters. Connie did not say another word. More than an hour had passed since the disaster began. Teacher Kino came back without me. Only the location tracking device I had been carrying. No body, no blood nearby. The others held on to that as the only comfort they had. At Onlai Town, Professor Mavis Halifax, Grand Mage, Magic Potions and Mechanical Systems teacher at Polaris Academy, and honorary professor at the Royal Knight Research Institute, was stretched thin. The town's residential area stretched 3 kilometers long. Maintaining a barrier that size while it absorbed constant monster attacks was draining even a 7th rank mage. On top of that, she had extended her magic outward to protect the railway line, even though she privately doubted whether iron tracks could survive what was coming. Then the arrival chime sounded from the station's linked magic device. She extended her spirit sense and froze. A train moving at over 80 kilometers per hour was approaching, carrying nearly 100 mechs and thousands of soldiers. From 50 kilometers away, including loading time, the long steel machine came howling across the farmland, its magic cores roaring, shaking the tracks and ballast beneath it. Monsters caught on the rails were simply scattered or crushed. The kingdom's flags and the 17th Corps battle standard whipped in the wind above it. Commander Tuttle stood on a specially equipped mech and used his combat energy to project his voice across the entire force. All units, combat ready. Every mech on the flatbeds released its grip and prepared to move. Every soldier grabbed a weapon. Even the ones still shaking did it. Then a second arrival chime. Then a third. All 3 trains. Nearly the entire 17th Corps delivered to the battlefield in under an hour. The student Brandt, who had flown out to clear some monsters from the barrier, came flying back with his eyes wide. He told Mavis the whole army had arrived. She stared at the train without blinking. The thing she had doubted, the strange iron road she had been told to protect, had just carried an entire military corps across 50 kilometers and placed them at her feet. Horse cart convoys suddenly felt like a bad joke. Tuttle's voice rang out again. All troops, dismount and form up. Mech pilots, check your units. Free attack formation. Target, monster swarm. Follow me. UK, UK. The battle cry went up across the entire force. Thousands of soldiers charged forward with shields raised. At the same moment, every 3rd rank mech opened fire. Magic cannons sending arcing salvos of thunder and fire over the soldiers' heads and into the monster swarm ahead. Each shot carried the power of a 3rd rank area magic spell. The monsters broke and scattered wherever the rounds landed. The long front line of charging infantry, the 2nd rank mechs pushing alongside them, and the artillery fire from the 3rd rank mechs overhead, all of it, moving together, tearing through the beast tide. Brant could not speak. Mavis Halifax, Grand Mage and the Academy's most experienced mech expert, stood completely still with her mouth open. Then from inside the town, the local militia, town guards, and hunters grabbed their weapons and ran out behind the army. The Royal Military was here. A Grand Mage was holding the barrier. The monster swarm was already crumbling. Nobody in Onlai was going to stand back and watch. UK. From my tree, I felt the arrival of the army through my spirit sense. Tens of thousands of magic and combat energy signatures lighting up at once. Grandfather had sent all 3 trains fully loaded. I stood up on the branch and watched the monsters swarm below thin out as the battle drew them away. It was going to be fine now. The 17th Corps plus the local garrison, backed by the Academy mages holding barrier formations at each town, would hold the initial wave. The later elite swarm, the 4th and 5th rank monsters that would condense from the disaster's energy, would arrive to find strong fighters already in position. Even if an 8th rank monster eventually formed, it would not last long surrounded by that many capable people. I decided it was time to move. I jumped down from the tree, deliberately cut through 2 second-rank monsters to get noticed, and let the swarm start chasing me. Then I ran toward Onlai Town and the army lines, fighting my way through. I also let myself take a few hits along the way. Going back to school completely uninjured after being lost in a rank 8 disaster would raise questions I did not want to answer. The battle played out as I expected. The 17th Corps held until the 15th Corps arrived as reinforcement. The Academy's mages provided area magic support that broke up the large monster clusters. The local churches sent healers immediately. By 10 that night, most of the monsters were gone, and the remaining scattered ones were handed off to the warrior students from the Academy. The 17th Corps stayed in place to treat their wounded. The 15th Corps counted casualties and boarded the trains home. Inside the command tent, Commander Tuttle received the casualty report. Heavy infantry dead, 372. General infantry dead, 1223. Serious injuries in the hundreds, light injuries in the thousands. Mech destroyed or heavily damaged across all 3 ranks. Total confirmed dead, 1,595 soldiers. Tuttle sat quietly with his fist clenched. Civilian casualties, by comparison, were very small. The barrier formations had held. That was the only reason he did not feel worse than he did. Then a guard reported that a young high warrior carrying a sealed order from Prince Ursa was outside asking to see him. Tuttle let him in. I pulled back my hood. I told him who I was, grandson of Suman Ursa, currently enrolled at Polaris Academy under the name Su Lian. Tuttle stared at me for a moment as everything clicked into place. Tuttle figured out the situation quickly. I was the missing student from the Academy exercise, using a false identity. I needed him to send word that I had been found sheltering in a cave and treated for minor injuries by his troops. A clean story, easy to verify, no questions. He agreed without hesitation. Then he started to call for a healer, and I told him not to bother. The church and the military healers were busy with soldiers who actually needed urgent care. My wounds could wait. Tuttle looked at me differently after that. Then I told him I had something to say about the casualties. His secretary's face went tight immediately. But Tuttle held up a hand and told me to continue. I asked him plainly whether the heavy infantry had brought their full equipment to the battle. The answer was obvious from the casualty numbers. The heavy infantry had taken the worst of it precisely because their protective gear was incomplete. I had already worked it out. Someone had decided the trains could not carry the full load and ordered equipment left behind at the boarding point. Tuttle was quiet for a moment. Then he straightened and apologized directly. He admitted it clearly. When the railway capability reports had been distributed to the Corps commanders, he had dismissed the listed load figures as exaggerated. The numbers sounded impossible for anything that was not a mech carrying itself. So when the emergency deployment happened, he had ordered the heavy infantry to leave behind part of their armor and even had some mech defensive plating removed, all to stay within what he personally believed the train could handle. He said it was his failure. He would include a full account in his self-report to Central Command and formally accept responsibility. I had not expected that. Most commanders in a comfortable kingdom find ways to shift blame sideways. I told him I had no authority to criticize him. I just wanted to express that the doubt about our railway had frustrated me. What he did with that was his own business. Then I asked what he thought of the magic trains now. He answered immediately, the best transport system in the world. No contest. I told him that was a very fast change of position. He said absolute facts did not leave room for argument. His secretary nodded in agreement. I kept my thoughts to myself, but my assessment of Tuttle went up considerably. Rational, direct, willing to own his mistakes when the evidence was in front of him. That kind of person was rare in a kingdom that had been comfortable for too long. I was about to say something else when a sharp voice came from outside the tent. Tell your commander I am here right now. Honorary professor at the Knight Research Institute, magic potions and mechanical systems professor at Polaris Academy. I am not waiting. The 3 of us exchanged glances. None of us recognized the voice. Tuttle looked at me, aware that I was hiding my identity. He called out for her to come in anyway. A tall blonde woman walked in with long strides, locked eyes on Tuttle immediately, and started talking before she had fully stopped moving. She introduced herself as Mavis Halifax, Magic and Mechanical Systems Professor from Polaris Academy, and Honorary Professor at the Knight Research Institute. She wanted access to the magic trains. Full inspection, full data, as much as possible. She explained in a rush that she had tried to see the trains during the battle, but they had already left with the troops. Now one had come back to transport the wounded, and she had been blocked at every turn. Orders from grandfather and the military command, everything classified. Tuttle tried to calm her down. I spoke up and said the magic train was not a highly advanced technology. Its value was in the design concept, not secret components. Any strong nation that got a look would be able to copy it fairly quickly. Not quite the same as mech technology, which meant getting access, given her credentials, would genuinely not be difficult. She just needed to calm down and ask through the right channel. She turned and actually looked at me for the first time. Then she noticed my school uniform under the cloak. Tuttle smiled and told her if she wanted to know about magic trains, I was the right person to ask. I introduced myself, grandson of Suman Ursa, enrolled at Polaris Academy under the name Su Lien, former student at the Knight Research Institute. I even mentioned that I had attended one of her lectures at the Research Institute the previous year on magic conversion efficiency and metal magic patterns. She stared at me blankly for a moment. Then it all clicked. She grabbed both my hands and asked if I had the full data and whether I could take her to see the production facility. I pulled a manual from my storage ring, passenger, freight, and military specifications for the current model, with notes on future upgrade plans. Her eyes lit up completely. She pulled me into a hug before I could react, and I ended up face first against a very soft, very fragrant chest. Then she sat down in the corner and started reading with total focus. Tuttle gave me a look that said absolutely everything without words. I ignored it. I told Mavis she was welcome to come back to grandfather's estate with me on my next visit if she wanted a proper tour of the production facility. She nodded enthusiastically without looking up from the data. I turned back to Tuttle. I told him I wanted to ask, on grandfather's behalf, for his help promoting the magic trains within the military. The 17th Corps had now completed a real emergency deployment and understood the loading process firsthand. I wanted them to run a proper military transport exercise, document the optimized procedures, and help spread that knowledge across the entire army. Tuttle studied me carefully. 12 years old, barely past the age when most students were just entering their first academy. And he was sitting across from me asking himself whether I actually had the authority to speak for a prince. I told Tuttle plainly that military exercises required central command approval, but anything involving magic train operations would naturally defer to grandfather's input. Nobody in the military understood the trains yet. That was exactly why General Monslow had been slow to think of using them. He had only made the call after the troops were already assembled. I also pointed out that our territory had completed trial operations across all major lines before the national rollout began. We had run loading and transport tests, the distances, the load limits, the timing. Nobody had better data than we did. His troops had arrived light and still been slower than they needed to be. Tuttle asked what we wanted. I cast a second-rank soundproofing spell without chanting. His eyebrows went up slightly. I told him simply, when the military transport exercises were organized and the procedures were being formalized, I wanted our people involved. The secretary understood immediately. Mavis paused over her manual for just a moment. Having grandfather's people embedded in that process meant we would know exactly how the military used the railway system. And the reason it had to be the 17th Corps specifically was straightforward. The elite 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Corps were completely loyal to the crown. There was no way in. But a corps that had just taken heavy losses was absorbing new recruits and needed to rebuild. That was a different situation entirely. Tuttle asked what was in it for him. I told him there was nothing to frame as good or bad. His corps had fought bravely against a rank 8 disaster. The loading problems had been a natural result of being unfamiliar with new equipment, completely understandable, easily corrected with proper training. A corps with veterans, wounded soldiers recovering, and fresh recruits was actually the ideal mix for developing military transport doctrine. The 17th Corps running these exercises would build its reputation, not damage it. The responsibility question, the one about the equipment left behind, quietly disappeared inside that framing. Tuttle breathed in slowly. He asked if I could actually reach grandfather directly. I smiled and told him I was grandfather's only grandson. He made his decision. The transport exercises were worth pursuing. I pulled 2 gold magic train annual passes from my ring, engraved with the kingdom flag and grandfather's crest, and mentioned that the flower fields in our territory were in bloom. He accepted them without comment. I dropped the soundproofing spell and asked for a basic tent for the night and some food. Tuttle said the army only had rough rations. I said that was fine. I told Mavis to give the manual back when she was done. She could read it, but not keep it. She waved me off without looking up. Outside the tent, Tuttle turned to his secretary and gave his assessment. Not a child. Clear thinking, precise language, calm under pressure. He had spotted Mavis as an opportunity the moment she walked in and had handled her perfectly. And the soundproofing spell, that was no chant, second-rank magic, from someone registered as a high warrior. To cast that silently required at least 4th rank Grand Mage level, possibly 5th. Hidden strength, hidden identity, a monopoly on the most powerful transport system in the kingdom already in place. Tuttle told his secretary that in terms of real power among the younger generation, noble children, even princes included, there was nobody in the same position. The 17th Corps stayed camped near Onlai Town. The magic trains brought their supplies directly, yet another demonstration of what the railway could do. Mavis had gotten the data she wanted and promised to say nothing about my identity when she returned to the academy ahead of me. 2 soldiers escorted me back on horseback the following afternoon. My cover story held without any questions, sheltered in a cave, found by the army, treated and returned safely. The academy was relieved that only 1 student had died during a rank 8 disaster. Within acceptable limits, apparently. What I had not expected was Drasandi. The moment she saw me, she ran over and cried into my shoulder for a solid minute. Rex told me later that after Connie's mocking had convinced her I was dead, she had been blaming herself the entire time. I was the one who had been carrying her when the tiger appeared. I also learned the full story of Abel Marcus, the quiet student who had almost joined our group before Connie pulled him in instead. He had died in the disaster. I filed that away with everything else I already thought about traditional noble families and their useless children. Back in my room, I stripped off my clothes to wash up, stepped in front of the mirror, and stopped. No injuries. Not a single mark anywhere. I stood there and went through it carefully in my mind. I had taken light hits coming out of the forest, a few spots where my magic shield had been broken through. Most clearly, I remembered 3 claw marks on my left arm from a wolf-type monster during the cleanup phase. I had still had those wounds when I was in Tuttle's tent. I had even started to say something about asking for a healer before I stopped mid-sentence, because in that moment I had checked my body and realized the wounds were already gone. I had dismissed it as exhaustion at the time. Now standing in front of a mirror, it was undeniable. Everything had healed on its own. I had not cast any healing magic. Water, light, or wood-type recovery spells were not something I could use instinctively mid-battle. Even if I had somehow triggered one unconsciously, it would have only affected a small area, not every wound across my entire body simultaneously, which left one explanation. Something in my bloodline. Father and mother were ordinary. Grandfather was well documented. But my grandmother, the one I had never met, the source of my silver hair according to grandfather, that was a question mark. A race with natural regeneration ability? It was possible. I decided not to ask Uncle Lane. If grandfather had not told me directly, Lane would not either. I would have to ask grandfather myself on the weekend visit. Looking back, it made sense that I had never noticed before. Any time I had been injured, hunting with Lane, the arena fights, someone had used healing magic immediately. There had never been a wound left long enough to close on its own. This time, wanting to avoid exposing my magic ability, I had deliberately avoided healers, and accidentally discovered something new about myself. I turned on the hot water. No shower head in this world yet. Just a single stream of hot water pouring straight down. Perfectly fine. Back at the academy, the disaster became the main topic for a while. Abel Marcus's parents came to collect his belongings, and that hit the students harder than any announcement had. The investigation into Connie's group concluded with a finding of accidental death due to the disaster. Connie's noble status ended any deeper inquiry. I, on the other hand, received a commendation from the academy. Quick decision-making during the disaster, protecting a younger female student, carrying her over distance, and successfully getting her clear of a 5th-rank mutant monster attack. I found the whole thing unnecessary. But I understood what the school was doing. One student had died, and they needed something positive to balance the story. I accepted the award without comment. Everything returned to normal after that. Except for one thing. A transfer student had arrived, and people were paying attention. That afternoon, I actually attended class, Inscription Magic and Magic Tool Creation Theory. Most magic courses I skipped since grandfather's private tutors had covered them years ago, but Inscription Magic was different. That was specialized enough that even the best private tutors could not teach it properly. So I sat in the front row, center seat, directly facing the teacher's desk. Nobody sat there voluntarily, which meant no risk of Drasandi, accidentally, ending up beside me. She had been doing that a lot lately. Professor Bunyan walked in and immediately made clear that anyone who could not answer a question at the end of class would have the lesson marked as absent. Connie in the back row went pale. He had not brought his textbook. His followers scrambled to cover for him. Then Bunyan paused before starting the lesson and looked toward the door. I felt something strange a moment before it happened. A faint pulse, like blood, like recognition, coming from the corridor. I could not explain it, but I felt it clearly. Bunyan told someone outside to come in. A girl walked in with quiet, even steps and stood at the front of the class. Black hair reaching her waist. Pale clear skin, perfectly balanced features, a faint smile that felt composed rather than warm. Her presence had a quality to it, like moonlight in a still room, drawing your attention and then holding it. Her eyes were deep blue, almost like looking into something that had no bottom. Every boy in the room went briefly blank. Even most of the girls were caught off guard. I narrowed my eyes at her, and she noticed me at the same moment. Something passed between us, a recognition, a question, a shared awareness that the other person was not ordinary. Our eyes met for less than a second, and then moved away. Bunyan explained she was a transfer student from the Yemenic kingdom, joining the class since they were now one short. Yemenic. Of course. She was one of the students I had seen arriving at the military academy 2 years ago on the day I graduated. The one Walker had pointed out, the girl with black hair so unusual for this continent that he had guessed she might be from the Eastern bloodline. I had looked at her then and said there was no need to introduce myself because my army would conquer her country eventually. She had taken 2 years of military study and was now transferring here with a 2-month delay, probably to arrange identity documentation. She introduced herself to the class. Her name was Narlene Setites. High mage level. She wrote her name in the air using red magical energy. Red. Setites. I recognized it immediately, and I understood why she had used that color specifically. It was meant for me to see. Our eyes crossed one more time. We both confirmed what we had already suspected about the other. The blood pulse I had felt in the corridor, the way she had looked at me first, her family name written in red. She already knew something about what I was, and I now had a very strong guess about what she was. Bunyan told Narlene to find a seat and share someone's textbook until hers arrived. Every boy in the room straightened up immediately. I, on the other hand, was hoping she would pick literally anyone else. She glanced at me for half a second. I saw the mischief in her eyes before she even moved. She walked directly to the front row, stood next to me, and asked politely if she could sit beside me. The silent outrage from every other male in the room was almost audible. I smiled, said it would be an honor, and slid my textbook toward her while privately wanting to say something much less polite. She sat down looking quietly pleased with herself. Behind us, Drasandi was puffing out her cheeks. Connie in the back row had gone tight with fury. In his mind, a nobody commoner student had no right to sit beside someone like Narlene. If it had been any other teacher's class, he probably would have walked up and physically moved me. But this was Bunyan's room, and nobody tested Bunyan. The class went unusually quiet for once. Bunyan seemed to appreciate it without knowing why. Halfway through the lesson, Bunyan asked if anyone had questions. I raised my hand. I asked whether an explosion from lamp oil or specially made magic powder, inside a container crafted from metal with fire and burst-type inscription, magic, would produce compounded fire damage. The physical explosion and the magic inscription working together, or whether they would interfere with each other and reduce the effect. Bunyan's eyebrow moved slightly. He answered directly. Using ordinary magic powder, 3rd rank burst inscription, and 3rd rank alchemical metal. The result would rival a 5th rank spell in destructive force. The class reacted with surprise. Skipping 2 ranks in power was not nothing. I had my answer. The 2 energy types stacked rather than cancelled. I would need to test it myself, carefully, once I had the right materials and proper safety measures in place. I was not interested in blowing myself up a second time in any lifetime. Bunyan asked where the idea had come from. I told him about the ancient goblin magic powder cannons, weapons that predated the magic core engine and were abandoned once the core allowed direct magical element emission without ammunition. I said they seemed worth revisiting as a supplementary option for situations where carrying a full magic power core was not practical. Bunyan said the approach was interesting and viable, but dangerous. He warned the class that inscription of explosive-type magic onto containers was extremely hazardous, and that adding magic powder to the equation was not something any responsible mage researcher would attempt lightly. He looked mostly at the magic students when he said it. He did not worry much about me. I was registered as a warrior. No magic ability meant no way to run the experiment myself. He had no idea I was already planning exactly when and where to test it. Class continued. The small interruption closed. The results of that question, I knew, were going to lead somewhere that would make Bunyan regret how casually he had answered. The moment class ended, I grabbed my things and left quickly, not even collecting my textbook from Narlene. Better to create distance than deal with whatever was about to unfold in that room. Behind me, Connie walked straight up to Narlene and introduced himself, grandson of Duke Hodge Alfred, one of the 3 great dukes of the kingdom, very pleased to meet her. He turned on every bit of noble charm he had. Narlene smiled pleasantly and asked if he knew which dormitory I lived in, because I had forgotten to take my textbook back and she wanted to return it. Connie's expression froze. She took his stunned silence as a no, said she would go find me herself then, and started walking out. He called after her. She turned back with a bright expression, clearly thinking he had remembered something useful. He offered instead to escort her around the academy as a guide since she was new. She said what a wonderful idea, thanked him warmly, announced she would ask me to show her around after returning the book and treating me to a meal as thanks, and walked out. Then she stopped at the doorway, turned back one more time, looked directly at Connie, and said he was really such a good person, and left. The word good person, in this context, the most devastating possible thing to say to someone trying to make an impression, hit Connie like a physical blow. His expression collapsed completely. He kicked the chair I had been sitting in and started cursing. His followers went completely silent. Nobody dared make a sound. Drasandi watched from the side, worried, and decided she needed to warn me. She went to my dormitory, then the cafeteria, then the library. I was not at any of them. Behind the school, past the snack street, up the back of a small hill where the old overlooking platform had been left to decay and nobody ever came. That was where I had arranged to meet Narlene. The sky had gone dark. The wind had a bite to it. She arrived saying it was quite frightening to be called out to a dark, deserted place like this. I told her that a vampire from a bloodline clan probably did not need to be afraid of the dark. She laughed and said it depended on who she was with. I told her directly. I was a mixed blood, and the family members who knew had never told me. I had only noticed the signs recently, and confirming it only became possible when I encountered someone of the same origin. In the darkness, both our eyes carried a faint glow. Mine deep blue with an edge of something feral and dangerous. Hers the same blue, but with a beauty that pulled you in, which I understood meant something to be wary of. She floated my textbook back to me with a small magic gesture and said she had wondered why she had felt nothing before entering the academy. Her family name, Sedites, was one of the 13 great vampire clan names. I had spent years living abroad in my previous life and had come across enough of that particular mythology to recognize it immediately. When she had written it in red during her introduction, I had known. And I had also finally understood why my wounds healed on their own. I asked whether using her real clan name at enrollment was actually safe. She said only vampires and those connected to them would recognize the clan names. To everyone else, it was just a foreign surname. Then she asked how I had recognized it at all if I barely knew anything about vampire bloodlines. I said a family member's personal notes had mentioned it, and also that the name alone had not been the only thing I was going off. She nodded without pushing further, though I could see she had filed the question away for later. I asked her directly whether she had used blood magic to obtain noble status in Yeminik before transferring here. She gave me an amused look and pointed out her introduction had not mentioned anything about noble status. I told her the message I had left inside the textbook was written using the Elvisu Kingdom's military encryption format. The fact that she had come meant she had read and understood it, which meant she already knew more about me than she was letting on. She smiled and confirmed it. She had also worked out my real name from the context, Suman Leander, the only grandson of Prince Ursa, from the royal house where the family name came first. She said she wondered what Connie would look like if he found out the commoner he had been cursing was actually Prince's blood. I told her I was fairly impressed she had pieced it together from those clues alone. Then I got to the point. I said I had not asked her to a dark hillside for casual conversation. I wanted to learn vampire blood magic. In exchange, I could offer her substantially more security and practical benefits than a student identity alone provided, backed by grandfather's authority as a prince. She asked my level immediately. I untied the suppression ribbon from my neck and let my magic out. 5th rank Archmage. Main elements covered to 3rd rank attack, defense, and support. Wood element from Elven tradition, ice from the northern lineage, body enhancement magic at the same tier. She nodded slowly, clearly recalculating her read on me. Then she said if I wanted blood magic, why not just have grandfather find a more powerful vampire teacher? I told her that if that had been easy, grandfather would have done it already, given the magic talent I had shown from a young age. She understood immediately. The mixed blood came through grandmother, and grandfather had not actively pursued this direction. She said the trait itself was not a problem. Her father had never said she could not teach it. But she warned me that blood magic carried a serious stigma in much of the continent, especially in the more powerful empires where it was classified as dark magic and treated as heresy. I told her grandfather's reaction when I had asked about blood magic years ago was the same as when I had asked about learning curse magic. Completely indifferent. She went slightly quiet at that. Curse magic and blood magic in the same sentence was not something most people said casually. I explained that I was not counting on some hidden talent or destined breakthrough to make me strong. I preferred to build strength the way I built everything else, through knowledge, preparation, and covering as many angles as possible. She surprised me then. She said if I genuinely wanted to get stronger, the better path might be to go back to grandfather and have him help awaken my vampire heritage properly, then focus on the warrior-type abilities that came with it. I pointed out my bloodline was only 1/4 at most. She explained that human magic talent had a ceiling. The great human mages existed because of sheer population numbers, producing rare exceptions. Against a vampire's innate blood magic affinity, or an elf's natural elemental connection, the growth curve was simply different. Bloodline talent in this world was a genuine structural advantage, not just a minor bonus. I thought about it seriously. In any field, someone born with deep instinct for a skill could reach in weeks what took ordinary people years. That was worth considering. I asked Narlene if she wanted to come back to grandfather's estate with me that weekend. She immediately launched into a performance about how frightening it was to be invited home by a noble boy she had only just met, clutching her cheeks dramatically. I told her to stop. She laughed. I pointed out she was probably not actually 12 years old. Vampires lived for a very long time. The laughter stopped. A very dangerous smile replaced it, along with a wave of 6th rank blood magic pressure rolling off her in warning. I immediately told her I had only meant that her youth and beauty were timeless regardless of her actual age. She accepted that. Barely. She never told me her real age. But someone with a 28-year-old soul from a previous life, plus 10 years of this one, could hold a full conversation with her without any effort, which meant she was definitely not 12 on the inside. I kept that thought entirely to myself. The next morning at the newly opened station south of the academy, Uncle Lane was waiting with a look of complete confusion on his face. I had told him I was bringing people home to discuss things with grandfather. He had apparently not expected me to arrive with both a tall blonde teacher and a black-haired girl in tow. I introduced Mavis as the Academy's Magic and Mechanical Systems professor and honorary researcher at the Knight Research Institute, here to tour the production facility. Then I introduced Narlene as a classmate, friend, nothing more complicated than that. Narlene immediately told Uncle Lane in a hurt voice that after everything we had discussed alone on the hillside last night, being introduced as just a friend was really quite painful. Uncle Lane nodded seriously and said he understood completely. He understood nothing correctly. Mavis looked at me with an expression suggesting her opinion of me had shifted in an unflattering direction. I decided explaining would only make things worse and said nothing. We boarded the first-class compartment. Lane hung a placard with grandfather's crest outside the door to keep any pushy nobles from trying to claim the space. Mavis was too excited to sit still and kept getting up to look at other cars. The ride was smooth and fast, far beyond anything a horse cart could offer. Once Mavis had wandered off to another carriage, the three of us were alone. I asked Uncle Lane if he had actually understood. He turned to Narlene and asked directly what her father's name was. She said August. August Sedites. Lane nodded and said he understood now. He had known from the moment he heard the family name. He had just needed Mavis out of earshot first. The pieces continued to fall into place for me. Rapid healing. The blood sense recognition with Narlene. And now the way she had suggested, I focus on warrior-type abilities rather than magic. Abilities that would come from the bloodline itself. Blood magic users. Warrior type. Vampire bloodline with those specific characteristics. I was beginning to think the answer was not just vampire. The bloodline running through me might be werewolf. Grandfather's territory of Petter Saint was just entering spring when we arrived. Along the road, farmers were working their fields and bowing respectfully at the sight of grandfather's carriage flag. People we passed were smiling. The whole place had a relaxed, well-cared-for feeling. Mavis commented on it with some surprise. I explained that grandfather had always treated the people in his territory well and had never been interested in personal luxury, so most of the money ended up benefiting the residents. When he genuinely ran short on funds, he would go to the king, his older brother, and ask directly, which had happened more than once. Narlene asked if the king was lenient because grandfather was the youngest. I said essentially yes. When the current king took the throne, grandfather had been 7 years old. Power struggles had nothing to do with him, which was also why, when grandfather proposed building roads across the entire kingdom at his own expense in exchange for operating rights, the king had approved it quickly. In the balance of power among the princes, grandfather was the least threatening. Letting him get a little rich seemed harmless. Though by now, I said, looking out the carriage window, the king had probably started to realize things were not quite as simple as that. We were not heading to the estate first. We were going to the magic train manufacturing facility, where grandfather was already waiting. The road had shifted, no more farmland, just trees and guard posts. I asked Mavis a direct question. I told her I knew her background, from a magic potions family, had studied mechanics because of her love for mechs, studied abroad with the goblins, now teaching at the academy, and holding an honorary position at the research institute. I asked whether she would be interested in learning about, or personally participating in, the construction of large mechanical equipment beyond mechs. The atmosphere in the carriage changed. Mavis asked whether she could claim not to have seen anything if something happened. I told her she was only here to see the magic trains. Nothing more than that. She said that sounded fine to her. We arrived at the facility, originally a horse cart factory expanded 4 years ago, built against a hillside with mountains on 3 sides and a sea bay hidden behind the last ridge. Completely isolated. I stepped out and used a space magic spell to swap into my research uniform from my storage ring. Narlene found the technique impressive and went back into the carriage to try it herself, emerging in a Gothic-style dress that suited her surprisingly well. Inside, Mavis could barely contain herself. She asked questions at every station, examining each section of the production line in detail. Narlene was less interested in the machines and more interested in counting the number of people quietly watching us from the shadows, all high-rank mages that grandfather had placed among the workers as surveillance, there to monitor any visitors, including ones I brought personally. The tour took about an hour. When we settled in the rest area, Mavis was already reading a new booklet on the next-generation train design. Narlene remarked quietly that there seemed to be very few people here connected to the kingdom government. I explained that grandfather had generously handed over most of the original workforce and technical knowledge to the king, letting him set up his own facilities and train his own staff, which naturally meant this original factory, somewhat remote and out of the way, had ended up with almost entirely our own people. Mavis added that the operation seemed very well organized. I smiled and agreed. It was easier to manage when everyone working here was someone we trusted completely. The facility was not just a little large. It was considerably larger than it appeared from the entrance. Grandfather's voice came from outside the restroom, laughing and asking why I had brought guests all this way without introducing them to him first. I quietly told Mavis not to bow formally. We did not stand on ceremony in this family. She nodded and greeted Grandfather with a respectful but relaxed tone. Narlene kept hers equally simple. Grandfather looked at Narlene and immediately asked if she was the future granddaughter-in-law I had brought home. I told him I was working on it. He laughed and said bringing a girl to a factory on a first visit was not the smoothest approach. Narlene politely said she found it interesting. I noted privately that she was being unusually well-mannered, which meant she was treating Grandfather's age with a certain respect. Whatever her actual number was, it was significantly higher than mine. Grandfather turned to Mavis and asked directly whether she would like to see something more impressive than the public production floor. Mavis hesitated. I could see her weighing it. Continuing further might put her in a position that conflicted with her family's connections to another prince's territory. But she also had a strong feeling, the kind you get when you are standing right at the edge of something that will change everything you know about your field. Then Narlene asked in her most innocent voice whether she could come along too. The room went quiet for a second. Grandfather smiled and said of course. Mavis agreed. I glanced at Narlene as Grandfather and Mavis walked ahead. She gave me a small wink. I said thank you quietly. She had done it deliberately. By framing her own request as the follow-up question, she had shifted Mavis's decision from whether to go at all to whether she could bring herself to refuse a curious young student. The hesitation had been resolved by someone else's simple question. Uncle Lane led us deeper into the facility. The corridors changed, from open floors with windows to sealed lower levels with heavy reinforced doors, each requiring a special magic device to unlock. Guards at every checkpoint. We eventually reached a circular room about 20 meters high and 100 meters across. A 10-meter metal gate stood on the far side. Grandfather ordered it opened. The gate swung back slowly, revealing a tunnel stretching hundreds of meters into complete darkness, until light magic devices activated automatically along the walls, illuminating what lay beyond. Mavis had already realized we were inside the mountain behind the factory. Now she understood just how much of that mountain had been hollowed out. The space on the other side was enormous. At least 2 kilometers deep, similar width, close to 4 million square meters of underground manufacturing floor. Workers, researchers, soldiers, and to Mavis's visible shock, goblin engineers moving between different sections with specific tasks. There were mechs in one area she recognized. Everything else she had never seen before in her life. I spread my arms and said welcome to Ursa Arsenal. Mavis was still trying to process what she was seeing. Half-finished tanks, half-finished aircraft, and various biomechanical weapons built on this world's magic puppet frameworks. All of it made from ordinary metal with only low-grade magic power cores. Every single one radiating danger. I explained that aside from the specially designed personal mechs, everything here used the cheapest available components. Mavis immediately asked how ordinary metal could survive a mech's magic cannon fire. I told her it would be easier to just show her. Uncle Lane had already called someone over. A goblin covered in oil stains walked up. Cam, one of the lead engineers. He waved off Mavis's handshake politely, pointing to his dirty hands, then immediately turned to Grandfather and complained that they needed better magic cores. They had burned through several testing the tank's top speed. Grandfather told him that buying large quantities of high-grade cores would draw the king's attention. Cam told Grandfather he was being too cautious. Grandfather told Cam he could afford to say that because he could just run away if things went wrong. Cam was deeply unimpressed. We all climbed onto a small transport vehicle, and Cam drove us slowly through the facility. Along the way, he mentioned that my revised tank design was significantly heavier than a standard mech. The heavy version would weigh roughly twice as much as a single Dalida-class unit. Mavis asked again how something made of ordinary metal could survive magical attacks. Cam's answer was simple. Go light and hit first. A 5th-rank mech or below, except for special custom units, could not outrun a light tank in open terrain. Mavis stared at him. 5th-rank mechs required trained warriors or mages to operate, and this thing made of cheap metal could outrun them. Cam pointed out she had arrived on a magic train capable of over 100 kilometers per hour. She started to argue that a train needed fixed rails, but he told her she would see for herself shortly. Narlene was quietly looking around at everything, her curiosity clearly running in a different direction from Mavis's. I warned her not to extend her spirit sense downward. The floor had detection magic traps layered beneath it that would bounce back against whoever triggered them. She said she had already felt something down there. I told her it was the warehouse level, 4 years of prototypes, test models, and finished units stored below us. She asked how long it had taken to hollow all of this out. Cam said 4 years, which was not very long. Narlene had no response to that. We reached another heavy door, passed through another tunnel, and came out into open light. A large warship was docked in a hidden harbor, completely enclosed by mountains on all sides. Before Mavis could take that in properly, a light tank came roaring past us at roughly 50 kilometers per hour, crested a small rise, caught air for a moment, and fired its magic cannon mid-jump. The shot hit a large target on the mountain face at the far end of the bay. Dead center. Fast. Accurate. Heavy firepower. Mavis's eyes went wide. Mavis fired questions faster than Cam could answer them. Full metal construction, estimated 15 to 20 tons, moving at over 50 kilometers per hour. How was that possible? Our kingdom's best third-rank Frostblade mech could only sustain about 30 kilometers per hour before the magic circulation overheated and started damaging the alchemical joint fibers. Cam asked whether I wanted to explain or he should. I told him to handle it, and said I would go prepare a trainer tank for Mavis to try herself. He called me lazy. I pointed out I had been away for 2 months, and he might have made changes I was not up to date on anyway. He let it go and started explaining the design principles to Mavis while I went with Uncle Lane to bring 2 trainer units around. The tanks we had built for this world used magic-based controls instead of the multi-crew system from my old world. A single driver could handle everything: movement, targeting, and firing, through a light magic display screen that projected a clear 180-degree view through the metal hull. Magic cannon fire was pre-charged and the aiming interface was integrated into the same screen. 1 person, full operation. When I pulled both tanks up, Mavis had already climbed inside the first one on her own and was figuring out the controls. She was a mech developer with decent piloting skills, so the simplified system was not going to stop her for long. I told her once she felt comfortable, I would take the second tank and she could try to hit me. 1 clean hit with the training cannon would count as a win. I mentioned I would ask Uncle Lane to bring a mech out as well, so she had 2 moving targets. She said her combat ability was basically 0. I told her I would go slowly. Narlene said she wanted to ride along in my tank. I asked whether she had actually been impressed by anything she had seen today, since she had looked fairly indifferent the whole tour. She insisted she was very shocked. She looked completely unbothered. I warned her about motion sickness. She asked what that was. I pointed at a test driver who had just crawled out of his tank and was being sick against the side of it, a driver who had been doing this for 2 months. Cam said the man drove like he was trying to become airborne and had a consistent record of being ill for 5 minutes after every 30-minute run. They had already assigned him a dedicated healer. The healer jogged over on cue. Narlene and I stared at that situation for a moment and said nothing. I got Narlene settled in the passenger seat of the trainer tank, showed her how the safety harness worked, confirmed Mavis had her controls ready, and started the engine. The magic core hummed. The tracks rolled. Speed built. I took us out onto the training ground and ran through the full set of maneuvers, turns, slopes, cannon adjustment, partly to warm up and partly because I had no intention of getting hit on the first pass. Around the harbor, the workers who were not busy started gathering to watch. Someone started taking bets on how long it would take Mavis to land a hit. People were cheering for the new mechanic to blow up the boss's tank. Then someone noticed Grandfather watching from the side, and the volume dropped considerably. Grandfather told Cam that having energy was a good thing. People stuck inside a secret mountain facility for long periods needed some way to let off pressure. Cam said as long as the pay was good enough, they would stay happy in a prison cell. Grandfather laughed. Mavis had not even started moving yet when Cam told her she could just go. I would get out of the way. She started the engine, accelerated too fast, lost control of the steering, and drove straight into the side of a small embankment. Cam stared at it. Grandfather laughed. Someone in the crowd muttered that this was what I meant by a road hazard. She recovered after a moment and began moving properly. though she kept her speed down to about 20 kilometers per hour, clearly nervous about pushing further. The workers watching started shouting advice, some of it useful, most of it enthusiastic noise. When I released a smoke screen, they got even louder, cheering for Mavis to cut through it with a wind element shot. She managed that, cleared part of the smoke, and kept going. The commentary from the sidelines got more creative. Someone warned her not to sit still during a reload. She figured it out, kept moving, and after 10 minutes landed a glancing hit with a fire element shot. It barely counted, but a hit was a hit. The crowd celebrated like she had won something significant. When she climbed out of the driving seat, she was flushed and sweaty and clearly running on adrenaline. I asked how it felt. She said it was incredible. I told her we had one more thing to see. She gave me a confused look. Was this not already the most impressive thing here? I pointed up. 3 propeller aircraft passed directly overhead, the downdraft catching Mavis's hair and pulling it sideways. She froze completely. They were not flying magic beasts. They were not the extremely expensive anti-gravity magic constructs. They were metal, moving at a speed that matched or exceeded some third-rank monsters. And they were clearly carrying weapons. Mavis grabbed my arm without thinking about Narlene being right there and started firing questions without stopping. What were they called? How did they fly without wind or levitation magic? What was the maximum speed? Could they be mass-produced? Were they armored? Cam smoked his pipe and said he always enjoyed watching newcomers see everything for the first time. Grandfather said this was only what I called the initial generation. Cam grumbled that I had better designs sitting in my notes somewhere and was deliberately holding them back until the current ones were fully proven in real conditions. I had told him too many hired workers meant too much risk of information leaking. He accepted it, but was clearly still annoyed. Grandfather walked over to Mavis and asked calmly whether she would be interested in joining them. She apologized for losing composure, straightened up, and gave her answer clearly. The tank alone might have made her hesitate. War machines came with complications involving her family's position under another prince's territory. But the aircraft, the flying machine, that changed everything. She said she would join Ursa Arsenal. Compensation was flexible. Danger was acceptable. Whatever the conditions were, she wanted to be part of building and developing what she had just seen in the sky. No more hesitation. No more calculation. Some things were simply impossible to walk away from. Grandfather smiled, but did not immediately respond to Mavis's declaration. She looked slightly anxious, wondering if there were conditions she had not heard yet. I asked if she knew flight magic. She said yes. I told her she could go up for a ride first. She almost forgot herself entirely at that. I had originally planned to take her up myself while one of our pilots flew alongside. But since Narlene had inserted herself into the day, I handed the job to Gabby Walton, our best pilot, selected from Grandfather's private military, and notably the only test operator without a chronic motion sickness problem. His calm professional manner settled some of Mavis's nerves. 2 aircraft went through their pre-flight checks while a scout confirmed the fishing boats had all returned to the harbor for the evening. Nighttime, sea zones attracted monsters, so the fishermen never stayed out late. I had sound dampening magic applied to both aircraft since the engine noise carried far across open water, and the military harbor's outer perimeter already had a large concealment formation that blocked both sound and visual detection from outside. We all boarded. Mavis and Gabby in one aircraft, Narlene and I in the other. I told Gabby to run the standard exercise. Find the marker buoys in the designated sea zone. Each aircraft destroys 3, then return. He acknowledged the order with practiced precision. Wind magic launched us off the ground cleanly. The aircraft climbed quickly. Mavis, sitting in the rear seat with the wind hitting her face, could barely form words. She was a 7th-rank Grand Mage who understood exactly how little magic energy the takeoff had consumed. A low-grade power core doing this felt genuinely impossible to her. She did not know how much work had gone into the aerodynamics. Cam and I had spent considerable effort on that problem. My previous life's homemade aircraft had used purchased components. Building everything from scratch to combat standards was a different challenge entirely. Gabby activated night vision magic assists as the sky darkened and ran the approach by the book, standard altitude check, target observation, cannon charge confirmation, free attack clearance. I pushed the nose down, lined up on a buoy, and fired a thunder element cannon shot. Clean hit. Gabby took the next one. We climbed after each firing pass, waited for the recharge, and repeated. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual about the execution. But from Mavis's seat, watching a cheaply built aircraft using a low-grade magic core deliver third-rank cannon fire accurately against surface targets while maintaining altitude beyond the range of any ground-based mech response. That was something else entirely. Air cavalry controlled the sky. Only specially built mechs could challenge them. That was the accepted reality of this world's warfare. What she was sitting inside right now was a mass-producible aircraft that made that entire calculation obsolete. After hitting our 3 targets, we turned back toward the harbor. Mavis could barely contain herself in the rear seat. I asked Narlene if she was all right. She said the wind was giving her a headache. I told her she could have just used a windshield spell herself. She said she had not wanted to interfere with the flight. I cast one around her anyway. She called me sweet and started performing shyness again. I played along briefly and moved on. We landed in the marked zone just as night fell. Standing near Grandfather and Uncle Lane was a group of riders I did not recognize at first glance. Then I saw the gear. Air cavalry. One of them, a relaxed-looking man I knew as Wild, complained that he would have come out to give us a proper exciting run if he had known Mavis was a grand mage instead of just a mechanic. He had assumed she was a new researcher. Narlene told him he should still be scared. Wild agreed immediately and turned to ask which of his subordinates had suggested he go out. Someone had clearly been trying to set him up to get embarrassed. Mavis put the pieces together quickly. These were hired air cavalry, not Grandfather's official private force. Their role here was to run drills against the aircraft, real opposition training with experienced riders. From what I gathered listening to the banter, the pilots had been losing regularly against the 5-rank mounts in early exercises. Mavis asked if they were seriously benchmarking against 5-rank air cavalry. Wald looked at her and asked if we had not taken her up to full speed yet. Pilot Gabby explained that standard protocol prohibited pushing the engine to maximum power outside emergency combat conditions. Doing so drained the magic core and reduced both the cannon firing rate and return range. Wald just said plainly, at maximum output, his 5-rank Purple Wing Griffin could not keep up. The bird was rated up to 500 kilometers per hour at full sprint, and it still could not catch the aircraft at full power. Mavis immediately turned to Gabby and asked for another flight. Gabby looked at me. I pointed out the night training session was about to start anyway. That was why Wild and his group had come. Mavis did not need any further encouragement. Wild asked nervously whether she was going to throw actual magic spells at them. She told him she only used magic for self-defense and research purposes. He stared at her. A grand mage level of power developed purely for self-defense and academic study. Grandfather said something quietly to Uncle Lane, who told me he would bring Mavis back to the estate later. I told Mavis to enjoy herself and headed back with Grandfather and Narlene. She was already walking toward the aircraft before I finished the sentence. Grandfather used flight magic to take us back to the estate directly. Whether Mavis returned for dinner or spent the night in the research facility learning from Cam was entirely her own business at that point. I had gotten what I came for. Ursa Arsenal had a new mechanical engineering professor who also happened to know magic potions. The practical side of the day was done. What remained was personal. My grandmother's bloodline and what it meant for me. And the question of blood magic, which Narlene was here to help answer. Dinner at the estate was simple by any noble standard. One servant, good food but no excess, no audience of attendance. Narlene said she found it unexpectedly refreshing. Mother apologized for the short notice preparation. Grandfather mentioned this was the first time I had ever brought a peer home from school, which prompted Narlene to tease me about being special. I said the reason was that most people my age were too young to have a real conversation with. Narlene went quiet for exactly 1 second before smiling in a way that suggested she was storing that comment for later use. My sister Sevia, 2 years old and already opinionated about vegetables, declared she wanted the chicken from my plate. I negotiated her down to eating half her greens first. She agreed reluctantly. Then Narlene leaned over and used some kind of subtle magic to make the remaining vegetables look and apparently taste exactly like the chicken pieces Sevia preferred. Sevia was delighted. I was slightly outmaneuvered. Mother made a mental note of the technique for future use. By the end of dinner, Sevia had transferred her full affection from me to Narlene and refused to let go of her. I told Narlene her spirit animal was clearly a cat. She asked why. I said she was respectful upward, gentle with children, and saved all the aggression for the people in the middle. She had no response to that. Once Sevilla was put to bed and the table was cleared, grandfather got to the point. He asked Narlene directly whether she was a vampire and whether she was August's daughter. She confirmed both. Then she described her father the way someone describes a wound that is closed but still aches. The most gifted member of the Setites clan in 5 centuries, 9th rank power, top 10 among all vampires in overall strength, and a complete waste of it as a person. He moved through the world seducing people with his appearance and resources, leaving behind children he never intended to raise. Her mother had been a Viscount noble in Yemenic, intelligent and kind, and no match for someone like August. The family had known something was different about Narlene from early on. Her growth was too slow. The suspicion built over time until her father, apparently capable of sensing his own bloodline through blood magic, appeared one day from wherever he had been, taught her blood magic for a year, left a book of spells, used blood magic to blur her family's memory of him, and disappeared again. The one useful thing he had ever done for her, she said, delivered with complete flatness. She had inherited a large portion of his vampire bloodline. Her talent for blood magic was strong, and carrying that heritage in a human noble household in a kingdom that could turn hostile at any moment had made staying in Yemenic increasingly difficult. The timing of the conflict near her country had simply accelerated what was already inevitable. Grandfather listened to all of it quietly. Narlene's situation reminded me a little of my own past life. Absent parents, growing up without the support that should have been there. At least her father had shown up once. Mine had just written checks. I told her the straightforward thing. A parent like that was not worth chasing. Take the blood magic he left behind, build your own strength, and if you ever get powerful enough, go find him and hit him a few times for closure. She said she would send her student to do it instead. I suddenly felt less enthusiastic about becoming that student. Grandfather cleared his throat and brought the conversation back to the actual topic. He mentioned that August was someone grandmother had known, with a poor opinion of him, but known nonetheless. Long-lived powerful people tended to cross paths eventually. Then he turned to me and admitted something I had not expected. He said he had been planning to tell me everything about grandmother and about my bloodline, once I had settled into school life and built some real relationships. He had been waiting for what he thought was the right time. The problem, he said with visible exasperation, was that I kept arriving at every answer before he could arrange the explanation. He went through it. How he had planned to start teaching me magic at 4, because that was already early, and found me already reading magic books and generating my own energy at 3. How he had expected to guide me through the basics, and instead watched me run through all the entry-level spells on my own. How he had thought about introducing alchemy and mechanics as enrichment, and then found a mechanical bicycle I had built myself already being ridden around the estate. The sick chickens cured with experimental potions. The dead tree blown apart with alchemical powder. He said he genuinely did not know what to do with me anymore. Father nodded along to all of it. Narlene looked at me with open surprise and asked whether the tanks and aircraft were actually my designs. I did not confirm or deny it directly. The honest answer was that I had adapted them from another world's accumulated knowledge, which I could not explain. Grandfather said he had recently contacted grandmother to ask her to find a suitable vampire teacher for me. Someone who could help with both the blood magic question and the bloodline awakening conversation. And then I had come home having already found Narlene on my own. August's daughter, of all people. He was not angry, just tired in the way that people get when they keep being outpaced by someone they love. I explained how I had figured it out myself. The wounds healing during the disaster. Thinking back on how I had never once handled silver. All my allowance had been in gold coins, and whenever change needed to be made, Uncle Lane handled it, so I never received silver back. The blood sense when Narlene arrived at school. Everything pointing the same direction. I asked grandfather directly. My grandmother was a vampire-werewolf hybrid, was she not? In this world, vampires and werewolves were both classified as blood clan, sharing a connection to blood-based power that set them apart from ordinary demi-humans. Vampires used blood magic. Werewolves used blood combat techniques. Both were feared even by other demi-human races. They had not always had the best history, and the persecution campaigns centuries ago had pushed both groups away from the more visible aspects of their traditional practices. But the core abilities remained. passed down through bloodline inheritance. And somewhere in my lineage, one of those bloodlines ran. Narlene asked if grandmother was a pure-blooded werewolf. Grandfather confirmed it. Pure blood, and a war god rank existence. 9th tier. Narlene looked confused. Grandfather was a prince, and from his publicly known level, he was a 7th rank grand mage. How did someone like that end up with a 9th rank werewolf? Grandfather told her not to worry about it, then turned to me and said this was actually one of his complaints. He had planned to teach me how to conceal my power before I started school. Except I had already done it myself at age 10 when I graduated from the military academy and quietly had my mage registration erased. Narlene pointed out that hiding as a high warrior when I was actually a full-spectrum archmage was a bit extreme. I pointed out she was a grand mage hiding as a high mage, which gave her limited ground to criticize. She informed me that her situation was completely different. I agreed with her entirely and moved on. Then I asked grandfather directly whether he was actually a law god rank himself. He said he was surprised I was not more shocked. I told him it was not shocking. He was royal blood, and law god tier for someone of his lineage made complete sense. If anything, I had always thought his stated grand mage level seemed too low. Father confirmed he was a saint mage himself. So grandfather was a law god hiding as a grand mage. Father was a saint mage hiding as something lower. And they had been lecturing me about concealing my abilities. I asked if they had been sitting on this the whole time because of some old ambition toward the throne. Grandfather admitted it plainly. He had been born too late to compete for succession, but the ability was there, and some part of him had felt the gap. The current king, his older brother, ran the kingdom reasonably well, and starting a civil war in an already stable country made no sense. So instead he had simply saved everything quietly for years, which explained how the military research facility was funded despite the apparent budget deficit. Grandfather was a hoarder in the most literal sense, decades of careful accumulation. Narlene said we really were all the same kind of people in this family. Hidden strength, patient planning, and a talent for stockpiling. She was not wrong. Grandfather complained again that he had been planning to cultivate me gradually toward larger ambitions, and then I had shown up at age 7 already planning them myself. I deflected awkwardly. Narlene brought things back to practical matters. She asked what we wanted from her in exchange for teaching blood magic. Grandfather said he and father did not need it themselves. Knowing how it worked and how to defend against it was enough. The teaching was for me. I asked what she actually wanted in return. Her identity in Yemenic was no longer viable. Her mother had died before she left, worn down by years of waiting for someone who was never coming back. She had attached herself to the exchange group and ended up at the military academy, then here. She said money was fine for now, and she wanted her forged identity improved. The military had helped, but she did not fully trust it. Then she added one more condition. She wanted to learn blood combat techniques alongside me when that stage came. I asked if she even trained combat energy. She released it without warning. 5th rank Moon Radiance Warrior, completely hidden until that moment. Grandfather said even he had not detected it at close range. That was blood magic concealment at a serious level. She said she had only recently broken through to 5th rank, which was behind her magic development by a significant margin. I made a neutral sound. She asked what that meant. I told her it was pure admiration for her combining beauty and strength so effectively. She accepted that without further comment. We settled the terms. She would teach me blood magic. When I reached the point of learning blood combat techniques, we would study that together. Grandfather and father both agreed. Then I turned to mother and asked if she was all right with it. She looked slightly surprised that I had asked her specifically. She said of course it was fine. I had not asked because I needed permission. I had asked because she deserved to be included in the conversation. The blood magic arrangement was settled. As for my werewolf bloodline, grandfather explained that the self-healing ability meant I had already partially awakened it. To develop it properly, I would need to train a specific type of blood combat energy. He gave me the training method but advised against starting alone. Father had inherited very little of the werewolf bloodline and had never trained it himself, which meant there was real risk in me attempting it without guidance. Grandmother would arrive in about a month. We would wait. After the meeting broke up, Mother asked me to walk Narlene around the estate. I understood what she actually meant. Give her a chance to get comfortable with someone new to our family. Narlene understood too and went along without complaint. We walked quietly for a while before she asked whether I was bothered that grandfather had kept things from me. I said no. They had their reasons. And anyone willing to let me build railways, design weapons, and plan military strategy was clearly not trying to keep me sheltered from the world. She asked if I genuinely intended to start a war. I told her war was never a good thing and ideally would never happen at all. She asked why I was planning one then. I described the outside world. Yemenic already being pushed into conflict with Lankau. The larger empires stirring up worse wars beyond that. The continent was already burning in places. The question was not whether the fire would eventually reach Elvisu. It was when, and on whose terms. She said even if a strong empire unified the continent, peace would not last. History had proven it. The first generation builds, the second preserves, and somewhere between the third and sixth generation, the whole thing collapses under incompetence, cruelty, or internal ambition. Empires always ended the same way. I said she was exactly right, and that was the problem I wanted to solve. I told her my actual goal was to end the imperial system entirely. She laughed, genuinely, openly, with no attempt to hide that she found it absurd. She compared it to a child standing on a hilltop announcing they would become the hero who defeats the Demon King. I let her finish and then describe my actual plan. 3 years at Polaris Academy, possibly with a period studying abroad at a Goblin institution. Before graduation, using grandfather's 50,000 private troops, I intended to cross the Hidalia Mountains and take Yemenic, Lankau, and the SBE Kingdom. Then expand the force to 250,000 active with equal reserves. Narlene stopped laughing. She pointed out those 3 kingdoms combined were roughly the size of Elvisu. Crossing those mountains was an act of open rebellion. 5,000 troops against 3 kingdoms. What was my actual basis for confidence? I told her that if I could not take 3 small kingdoms, I had no business planning anything larger. And I said honestly, I did love war. Not the suffering, but the machinery of it. The unstoppable force of steel and strategy moving in perfect coordination. I intended to use that force to break every rotten imperial structure on the continent and build something that could actually last. She asked why I was telling her all this, noting that she was from Yemenic. I said that if she truly cared about Yemenic, she would not have left while it was being swallowed by its neighbors. She would not be in Elvisu building a new life. She probably hated her country, I said, or at least had no reason to defend it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked why I was involving her at all. I told her she was intelligent, unusually calm, and despite her occasionally exhausting personality, she was someone worth having on the same side. I extended my hand. She looked at it without taking it. She said she would consider it after I had actually taken all 3 kingdoms. I told her by that point she would need to prove she was still worth bringing in. We looked at each other in the moonlight and smiled. Not quite an agreement. Not quite a challenge. Somewhere between the two. Early the next morning, grandfather, father, and I dressed carefully in formal noble attire. I even put on a pair of glasses, which gave me a more scholarly appearance than usual. Narlene came downstairs yawning with breakfast in hand and asked if we were heading out somewhere important. I told her we were going to the Petter St. Plaza for a public assembly. Every noble, estate owner, and village head in the territory had been summoned. The topic was agricultural reform and economic policy. I asked if she wanted to come along. She hesitated for exactly 1 second. I told her we could wait. She wanted to get ready. The plaza was already full by the time we arrived. Nobles and estate owners sat in arranged seats at the center, surrounding a raised platform. The outer streets were packed with merchants, residents, and curious onlookers. Everyone had heard that today's announcement was significant. Some of the nobles were already complaining quietly among themselves. Grandfather had frozen all land requisition deadlines until today, leaving people unable to make planting decisions. A few were irritated about the public setting. They preferred private halls or the cathedral for this kind of thing. 10 Frostblade mechs escorted our carriage in and positioned themselves around the plaza perimeter, arranged so the crowd behind them still had clear sight lines to the platform. Grandfather, father, and I stepped up onto the platform. The assembled nobles stood immediately and bowed. Grandfather told everyone to sit. Today would be long and formality could be set aside. Once they settled, Grandfather explained briefly that we would first demonstrate some new equipment, and then the assembly would begin. He introduced me as the inventor, adding that I had quietly spent time studying at the Knight Research Institute and today was a chance to show what that had produced. I gave myself a simple introduction. I rarely appeared at noble gatherings, preferring to work on projects in private, so most people in the plaza knew my name, but not my face. The framing grandfather used, young mechanical genius, privately trained, enthusiastic about inventions, settled quickly in the crowd's imagination. That was exactly what I wanted. 5 machines rolled into the plaza on rotating tracks, their shapes unfamiliar and slightly strange to everyone watching. I looked out at the assembled territory, extended one hand toward the 5 machines, and announced that what they were looking at were magic-powered farming machines, 5 units designed to transform agricultural production across the entire territory. The 5 machines rolled into the plaza on their rotating tracks and stopped in front of the assembled crowd. Everyone looked confused. I told the operator to run a brief demonstration. The first machine moved forward about 5 meters and stopped. The nobles looked at each other blankly. Then the residents standing on the sides and behind the machine started reacting with visible surprise. Someone said, "Is that wheat?" An estate manager jumped to his feet and walked forward. Others followed. When they saw what the machine had left behind them, seeds distributed at perfectly even planting intervals across the ground it had passed over, their expressions shifted from confusion to something much more intense. I explained it simply. The machine collected seeds internally, distributed them at set intervals, and used mechanical claws to turn the soil simultaneously. One pass across a field completed both soil preparation and planting in a single run. The machine next to it was the harvesting version. One pass at the end of the growing season, and all the wheat would be cut, with the grain and stalks automatically separated and loaded. The estate managers could not speak for a moment. I pointed to the remaining 3 machines. One for root vegetables like potatoes, digging and sorting in a single pass. One for tall stalk crops like corn. One specifically for cotton harvesting. Someone burst out with an exclamation of pure excitement before catching themselves and apologizing. Grandfather's eyebrow moved. The man sat back down. I assured everyone that all 5 types were built with the lowest grade magic power cores and would run reliably for extended periods. The territory's relatively flat terrain made them ideal for widespread use. Production would begin as soon as space opened up in the manufacturing facility, which was already being freed up as other regions built their own magic train factories. The estate managers nodded eagerly. The village heads and ordinary residents did not look excited. They looked worried. If machines replaced farmhands, what would happen to their work? I handed the assembly back to grandfather, who passed it to father. Father told everyone to stay calm before he started. Then he announced the first major reform of Petter Saint territory. All land in the territory would cease to be leased to estate owners or nobles. Every parcel of prince-owned land would be allocated without charge to territory citizens, divided by household at a standard share of 5 people per family. Estate owners who still wanted to farm land at scale would now need to lease it from the citizens who held usage rights. The territory would collect only a small administrative fee, paid by the estate owner. The plaza went completely silent for a second. Then everyone reacted at once. Nobles, estate managers, village heads, and residents. All of them producing the same sound of total disbelief at exactly the same moment. Even Narlene in the carriage behind us visibly froze. Land given freely to commoners? The most lenient kingdoms on the continent still charged fees for long-term land use. This was not a reduced rate. This was nothing at all. The estate managers could not process it. They had spent years looking down at the workers they underpaid and the farmers they treated as servants. Now those same people would be the ones they had to negotiate with? One noble stood up and asked Father directly whether this was a joke. Father asked him if it looked like a joke. Another pointed out that grandfather had quietly adjusted all existing lease contracts to expire this year. Had this been planned the whole time? Father asked when the railway construction had begun. Everyone went still. I kept my expression neutral. The answer was when I was 7 years old. The moment grandfather and father had seen what the railway could do, I had laid out the full plan, including the land reform. We had adjusted the lease contracts that same year to expire 5 years later. If conditions were right, we would act. If not, we would simply renew the leases and wait longer. 5 years later, conditions were right. A village head stood up carefully and asked whether it was really true. No rent, just free use of the land? Father confirmed it. Farmable land, not forest or mountain. Households with more people would receive proportionally larger allocations. No fees, no grain tribute. Completely free. The commoners in the plaza stayed almost perfectly silent. Not from disinterest, from disbelief, so complete they were afraid to make a sound in case it disappeared. I told Father they needed time to process it and suggested he continue. Father turned to the estate owners and nobles and told them not to look so distressed. After years of cooperation, there was still a place for them. He laid it out clearly. Citizens who wanted to farm their own land were free to do so. But anyone who preferred to hand their usage rights back to the territory would receive annual payments equivalent to the standard wheat yield value of their land at current market prices. No farming required, just passive income. For the estate owners specifically, he offered something larger. Their old model of renting land and hiring cheap labor was ending. In its place, they were being given preferential access to magic train transport rights, not just within Peter Saint, but across the entire kingdom. The nobles who had been suppressing fury began to recalculate. Father continued. All citizens would have their basic food needs secured through the territory's centralized farming operations. That freed them to take factory work, join the expanded military with improved pay, or pursue other trades. The territory would build new facilities. The economy would open up. Estate owners who continued paying territory taxes would keep their railway trading advantages. The goal, Father said at the end, was to make Peter Saint the most harmonious and prosperous territory in the entire kingdom. He said it the way someone says something they have been certain about for a long time. The plaza went silent for one more second. I told everyone it was all right to celebrate now. Someone started it. Then the sound spread like water breaking through. Cheering, shouting, people calling out grandfather's name and father's name and mine. The noise carrying past the city walls to where the guards were walking their patrols. Then someone shouted UKA, the battle cry of the army, and the whole plaza picked it up. Not soldiers, just people. People who had just been told they had something that had never belonged to them before. Grandfather, father, and I stood on the platform and watched without interrupting. In the carriage behind us, Narlene sat watching the crowd. She was not dreaming. She had just witnessed the beginning of something she had not thought possible. She looked at me standing on the platform, calm, smiling, watching everything unfold exactly as planned, and understood for the first time that I was not simply an unusual 12-year-old. People who accomplish great things show it early. That was what she was seeing. When the crowd settled, Grandfather told them we were not finished yet. I added that Father still had a great deal more to announce, and they should listen carefully. Father smiled and said that with agricultural reform complete, the economic changes that followed would mean people would soon have money they needed somewhere safe to keep it. He said he had 3 more announcements to make. On economic matters, Father announced 3 more things, and even Narlene in the carriage looked surprised there was still more coming. The first was the Leander Gold Hall, a bank. Anyone could deposit money and earn interest, starting at 1% for flexible withdrawal and going up to 5% for a 5-year fixed deposit. Anyone who needed to borrow could do so at a minimum annual rate of 3%. The rates were competitive, the terms were clear, and a branch would open in the city shortly with full details available. Estate owners and nobles started asking questions immediately. How much could they borrow? Could they repay early for reduced interest? Father told them to wait for the full announcement at the branch opening. The second was Leander Insurance. Father explained the concept simply. Pay a small premium, and if something bad happens within the covered period, receive a payout larger than what you paid in. 1 gold coin for personal accident coverage, returning up to 10 if you were hurt. 100 gold coins to insure a shipment of goods, returning up to 1,000 if the cargo was lost in transit. Disease, accidents, property, all coverable. The premium was not refundable, but the coverage was real. Ordinary people started to understand. Merchants immediately began calculating. The third was the Leander Exchange, a place to formalize investment arrangements. Someone with a business idea but insufficient starting capital could take on investors through the exchange, sharing future profits in proportion to the investment. Those investors could later sell their share of the arrangement to someone else if they chose. The exchange would verify and record all of it. Father asked if everyone had a basic understanding of the 3 announcements. He was nervous, though he kept it composed. He had every right to be. A bank, an insurance company, And a stock exchange introduced simultaneously in a single territory was not a small thing. The volume of money that would begin flowing through Peter Saint once these took hold was genuinely difficult to calculate. And controlling that flow meant controlling economic conditions across the whole kingdom over time. I was not nervous at all. The concepts were sound. The details would attract the right people eventually. And as the ruling noble family of the territory, small operational problems were manageable. What mattered was getting the framework in place first. The sequence was deliberate. Agricultural machines freed the labor force from manual farming. Land reform gave ordinary people security and motivation. The financial infrastructure would capture the resulting economic activity and direct it where we needed it to go. And all of it would eventually support a military force that nobody in this kingdom, not even the king, would be able to challenge. There was also the immediate political reality. The estate owners had just lost their land leases. Their replacement benefit was the railway trading advantage. But to make that advantage work, they needed capital moving through the new financial system. If they wanted the railway privileges, they needed to put money into the bank first and demonstrate they were participating. Father and grandfather moved into the detailed explanations, land allocation procedures, lease transition timelines, railway access terms, and how to open accounts at the new financial institutions. For the nobles and estate owners sitting in front of them, the message was clear. The land was gone. The railway was the future. And the price of the future was depositing their money into the system today. By the time the assembly wrapped up, it was mid-afternoon and none of us had eaten lunch. Explaining banking, insurance, and a stock exchange to people who had never heard of any of them took considerably longer than announcing land reform. The estate owners and nobles who could not get to grandfather or father kept finding me instead. I changed back into my school uniform in the carriage. Narlene sat across from me and said nothing for a moment, then asked whether all of it had been my idea. I said yes. She thought about it carefully and then laid out exactly what she had understood. The farming machines freed the labor force. The land reform secured the commoners' loyalty while redirecting the nobles toward railway trading instead of land exploitation. The bank, insurance, and exchange would capture the resulting economic activity and funnel it back under our control. By the time the kingdom figured out what was happening, Peter Saint would be the dominant force in the country's economy and military both. And if the king ever tried to take the territory back, the commoners would be the first to refuse. Because grandfather had given them something no previous ruler ever had. I told her she had understood it completely and suggested we go back to enjoying school life. Father and grandfather could handle the implementation. She asked whether I would distribute land the same way after conquering other kingdoms. I said of course. Letting estate owners and nobles continue exploiting farmland was a waste of the land's actual potential. Better to free the people and redirect the nobles toward commerce. Most noble families were useless anyway. The ones worth keeping were the ones who actually knew how to make money. The rest could become ordinary citizens. She looked at me for a moment and said she was starting to wonder whether I was actually someone who had lived 30 or 40 years, the same as her. I said she had revealed her age. She summoned a blood sickle. I apologized immediately using the most elaborate compliments I could produce. She dismissed it. Then I said if she was nearly 40, I was probably slightly older. The sickle came back. I stayed quiet. We returned to the academy late that evening. I came through the gates carefully, checking for anyone Connie might have posted to watch for me. Nobody. He had not expected me to use the magic train. It was still expensive enough that most students would not think of it. I told Narlene tomorrow would probably bring trouble and she should keep her distance from me. She agreed pleasantly. The next morning I took the front center seat again to avoid Drasandi gravitating toward me. Narlene had agreed to stay away. Drasandi was on my left. Narlene was on my right. I stared forward. Drasandi said she had just happened to want to sit in the front today because she felt like paying attention. She said this while looking at everything except my face. I asked Narlene why she was there. She said she felt like sitting there. Was that a problem? Behind us, Connie's glare was drilling into the back of my head. The other boys were divided between envy and something worse. Several girls were visibly annoyed that both Drasandi and Narlene had ended up next to the one reasonably good-looking boy in class who never spoke to anyone. Narlene turned to Drasandi and asked with perfect innocence whether she had interrupted something. Drasandi went red and said absolutely not. She had just happened to sit here. There was nothing going on, Nothing at all. Narlene smiled and said of course. Drasandi went redder. I confirmed what I had suspected since the hillside conversation. Narlene was completely, deliberately, enjoyably terrible.